Hello, everyone. Happy morning, noon, afternoon, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. We're going to be continuing on with this wonderful video. And I went back and watched like the last couple seconds before this point and where we're kind of leading with this. And I think we're about to get into the real meat and potatoes where we'll probably agree with Joseph because I know I had some things to say about his Dark Souls 3 critique. But yeah. Shannon, wait, where's the first part? I have an ESAS archive channel that I put all the streams on, and I integrate chat into them. There's a link in the description. It will take you to the ESAS archive where it has all the previous episodes of ESAS, and I believe I have the last stream up on that channel at this point. I forget, but I forget if I actually uploaded it. I'm very disorganized. But yeah, if you want to see the first part, it is on the ESAS archive. Should be the most recent stream or recent video. All right, but now a couple things to preface before we get into this video. Number one, I'm going to try to finish this video today. I think I'll have enough time, but it kind of depends on the points he makes and how much I rant afterwards. But so that'll be number one. Number two, the anniversary of the channel is coming up. And right now I'm planning to do an anniversary stream the Saturday before the anniversary, which will be on September 21st. So expect a special stream on September 21st for the 9-year channel anniversary. So that'll be fun. And we're not going to react to anything there. I'm probably just going to pick a favorite game and play it. I might play Subnautica. I've been really wanting to play Subnautica lately. But that'll be just a fun, long, chill stream just to kind of enjoy life, as it were. But if in the event that I have to cancel that stream, we'll be doing it the Saturday afterward on the 28th. So I need to work out some family stuff first to see if they've got anything going on. But there will be a anniversary stream sometime near the end of September. The long and the short of it. But yeah, and also number three, I got a couple things. I'm trying to get this out of the way now. Number three is I have made a Discord for all of my sub channels. It is in the description if you'd like to join it. I'm very new to this, so forgive me if it's terribly organized or if it's just very bare bones right now. I've never made a Discord for a community before, so if you want to be a part of that, it's down there. And yeah. All right, and finally, number four. Oh, it's the base game review. Yeah. I'm not sure if I'll cover his DLC video, considering it's about the same length, but I might. I'm not sure yet. But we'll see how it goes. But yeah, the last thing I wanted to mention is I plan to, once I sort of run out of videos I've got in the list to react to, I plan to play Sekiro for a little bit while we stock up on other videos. And so I'm probably going to play Sekiro for a little bit in between times where I don't have videos to react to. So we'll see how that goes when we get there. But yeah, without further ado, let's get into this video. Don't worry, nobody knows how Discord fully works. Thanks for that. All right, well, I think Joseph was about to get into the bosses, so let's see what he has to say now.
Game designer working at From Software, and I never will be. Which brings us to the final topic of this video and the biggest issue on my list.
Wait, this is the final topic of the video? He's got half a video dedicated to this point. Unless he's actually like going to break this up into like subcategories or something. But I think I know where he's going with this. The bosses / end game.
I don't work for From Software. No, combat changes that were made. I saved the worst for last, just like the game does. Let's open this up with a question. There is obviously a right way to play games like this, in terms of build decisions, playstyles, and fighting strategies. These games are always built around this singular intended experience, and if you deviate from that type, then you are playing the game wrong, and your time with it is invalidated. My question to you is, what playstyle is that? Your answer will say a lot about how you approach these games. You may also be wrong because there is an objectively correct take here. If you've been watching how
I mean, I think I understand where he's going with all these points about sort of the correct way to play these games, right? Like you can't play these games like a lot of other typical sort of like combat games where you just kind of run in and just bash your head against the enemy until they die. That can work for a lot of the lesser enemies, but when it comes to the bosses and the tougher enemies, you do have to have like a sense of strategy. Like this is one of those games that you know you acquire knowledge, and the more knowledge you have, the better you are at the game. And there's a lot of knowledge to be had between like different attack animations, different openings, how big they are, how wide they are, different exploits to different attacks that the boss makes, attacks that you make, what spells work well at different times, what weapons work at different times, what builds affect the overall fight with each individual boss, all those little variables, right? And so I think I understand where he's coming from there, but to say there is an objective correct way to play the game, I think is kind of a step too far in that particular direction, because there are plenty of ways to play these games with different builds, and people have done crazy shit as well. Just look at any of Imfa's videos, beating Elden Ring without walking, right? Beating Bloodborne with guns only, like beating like Dark Souls with like just fists and stuff like that. Like all these runs where you can beat the game with any type of build, basically. But it comes at sort of the caveat that certain mechanics are going to be relied upon for these runs. In particular, things need to be consistent, and the game needs to not fuck you over. And I have a feeling he might bring this up at some point later on in the video, but I'm not sure. Elden Ring does have a problem with sort of taking all the things that they did in the previous games to catch players out, like combos, delayed attacks, AOE moves and stuff like that. Like things that were kind of a step up from like Dark Souls 1, Dark Souls 2, and like Bloodborne and stuff like that. Stuff that was kind of a step up from that in like Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro. Those things kind of set a higher bar for difficulty because now they've added elements that can catch you out. Like delayed attacks are a very common one in this game, where the enemy will do like a 2-hit combo or something, and then the third hit will delay just long enough where if you roll immediately after the second attack goes through, they will catch you out. But then they start doing that more and more, where the delay goes on even farther. Like Margit is a good example of that, where you can, or Margit / Morgoth, they both have that sort of thing, where you roll out of one attack and there's enough time in between like the attacks and the combo where you can get like maybe 2, maybe even 3 rolls before the attack actually comes through, right? So they are really playing on delayed attacks. They're really playing on extremely fast attacks, and they also have several moves throughout the game's bosses where they just have a move set that is faster than what you can physically do, right? Which is a problem that I have with the game. In particular, there are a lot of boss animations that are faster than your healing animation, and that's the thing that fucks with the combat a lot, especially when you take into consideration the speed of healing, the speed of the healing animation from the previous games to now, right? I haven't done a full measurement of it to actually break down how many like milliseconds or however much the difference is. But in Elden Ring, it is noticeable that you take longer to heal, but the bosses are faster than they are in previous games, right? So they have actually adjusted the difficulty disproportionately to the healing. And there are several moves that the bosses can do that are, either extensions of a combo or are follow-ups to a combo that are there. The attack animation is just faster than your healing animation. So even when you roll out of an attack that's finishing up and then you hit the roll button, they can come and kick your ass. A good example is the Erd Tree Knight dudes, the ones with the horned shield and the really annoying breath and tail moves. So those enemies have a move where if you try to heal after a combo, they can if if it's just slightly too long of a wait in between at the end of their combo, they will do their little sword poke at you, which covers a reasonable distance in melee range and is about as fast, if not less, than your healing animation, which catches you out while healing, which damages you further or pretty much negates the heal that you got, right? And I think this is a thing where like there are different elements of that in various fights in the game. Anyway, you don't have to react to it, but I think you really should watch the Shadow of the Erd Tree one, as he really mentioned this video and clarifies his points. Yeah, and this is one thing that I mentioned in the first stream that we did on this is he released this video in April of 2022, right? That's 2 months after Elden Ring came out, right? So that's very little time for him to A, play the game, and B, script and record and edit this video, right? That's a crunch time, right? It would be like me coming out with a commentary of a game within like 3 months of it coming out, when I make like 6-hour long commentaries on it, right? Like there's inevitably going to be stuff that will have been changed through patches and stuff like that, and new ways of doing things will have been figured out by the community and stuff like that, right? So a lot of the points in this video, I understand, are sort of, I don't want to say basic, but they're sort of like early opinions that haven't really had time to sort of sit and develop. And I think the Shadow of the Erd Tree will probably be a good follow-up to this if we have like problems with certain points. But I've also heard from some people that he makes points in that video that aren't really clarifications, but just straight up contradictions. But I don't know. We'll see if that gets somewhere in the we'll get somewhere in the thingy. No, the stream is not delayed. It's just I tend to go on a rant. I try to finish the rant and then I look at chat. so it's not that the stream is like super delayed. It's just I wanted to finish my rant before I start looking at comments or the chat. Because I don't. One thing I hate in other streams is when someone's making a point and then they get interrupted by chat, or vice versa. It's just kind of. I don't like that sort of like thing where you kind of mess with a point and then the whole steam of the argument kind of like falls to pieces. Right. I don't think this is fair criticism. You're not supposed to heal at neutral. I'd like for you to clarify that, Shan. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that comment. So are you responding to what I'm saying about the healing and attacks and stuff like that? Or are you talking about sort of when the boss is not recovering from an animation or when an enemy's not recovering? I kind of need you to clarify that a little bit more so I can respond to it. Yeah, that was that. Hey, sheep. I am early, but that's okay. Skill issue. Yes. Get up earlier. The streamer demands it. Anyway, let's get back to what old Joe's going over here.
Wrong, because there is an objectively correct take here. If you've been watching how I play in the majority of my footage, then you may already know what that answer is. And yes, this paragraph of the script I'm reading aloud right now is here just so the question has time to simmer before I reveal that answer. You're looking great, by the way. Been a while, I know. Say hi to your mother for me. The answer is a melee build with no spells. No, it's whatever you have fun with. Whatever that means to you can change the game drastically, and how you kill the boss may feel like an entirely different game than the one someone else played. But as long as you're having fun, who cares? This also extends to pretty much every single game out there, by the way. If you play with cheats and you have fun, then you had fun. You're playing the game, you're having fun. Who gives a shit? I don't understand why everyone is so fucking wrapped up in this debate and shit when it has such an obvious answer. If you're having fun, you're playing the game right. That doesn't mean we have all comparative experiences, but like...
I mean, this point he's making is totally fucked. It's like, if you play games with cheats, yeah, and have fun, great. It's like, what? What do you... You're not supposed to play the game with cheats. That's why they're called cheats. You are cheating. You are fucking with the system the game has developed for you to play. It would be like playing Dark Souls, but having a thing where you never lose health, or you take 1% damage the entire run. You're not playing the game as it was built for you to play it. You're playing a fucked up version. It's like it's like oh man. He says it's such a simple answer, but it's like you're encouraging people to play the game however they want and just to roll over and accept that as the game that they enjoyed. It's like cheating in a game is not going to see the game at its full potential, right? Like if these like a good example is if these games had an easy mode, right? If they had like a difficulty slider, right? The game is intended to be the difficulty it is, right? That's why they don't have that kind of shit. But if they had that kind of shit, a lot of people would just play on easy. They'd never go up in difficulty because they're just here they're just here for sort of the aesthetic of it all, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that. Plenty of games do that really well, right? Um, plenty of different types of games that the Souls game sort of covers have that. Whether it be like a combat focused game, an RPG, a fantasy game, whatever it is, right? I think him kind of overarching saying it's just like the answer is so easy. It's like, like the game needs to be taken for what it is. Cheating at it completely negates playing the game the way it was built to be played because you're cheating. You're fucking with what it is and how it works, right? Now, cheesing is sort of a different thing because it's the game not being able to account for certain things. That's like an exploit. Like, there's a difference between cheating and an exploit, in my mind, right? Like, cheating is just straight up doing things that are unfair, right? Exploits are things that all players can do if they know how to do it, sort of a thing. And it's that kind of difference between skill versus extra advantages that not other people have, right? That's complicated. If he means mods as in improving on the game's flaws or adding more quality of life, like seamless, I think that's okay. Yeah, that's the thing. I think mods are good, but cheating in general, right? Because he used the word cheating. He didn't say modding, right? So that makes me think that he's just lumping in every type of play into this, besides things that break the game. But then you have cheaters fucking over players' saves, having them clip through the map and die on a loop. Yeah, it's just cheating's not good. Like, I think his point was about builds, but just went to the extra mile and added cheats. Yeah, I think that's kind of why this is one thing I've noticed about some of the way he makes points is he'll often have sort of the meat and potatoes of a good point, but then he'll kind of push it into a strange direction to kind of reinforce the point. But that reinforcement doesn't reinforce the point, like with what he's doing here with the cheating thing. Like, again, if he said like mods or something, like that's one thing. If he said just playing the game however you want, that's fine. Like, I've got no problem with that. But like mentioning cheating, which is literally defined as doing things that are, using unfair advantages within like a medium, right? It's like that's something that not all of us can do, right? Like if you have to add something to the game to beat it, quote unquote, you're cheating, right? Now, if you mod it afterwards, that's a different thing. You're changing the game into a different type of thing at that point. But if you're just cheating, like with infinite health or extreme damage or whatever the cheat would be, it's like you're actively going against the way the game is designed to work. A melee build without spells is kind of crazy too. There's buffs, right, that are very good for melee builds. Yeah. Well, I think it's one thing too where, like, just kind of talking about Elden Ring builds for a minute is there's so much content in Elden Ring that it's very easy to end up creating a hybrid build, right? Like it might be, mainly it might mainly be a tank build, right? But maybe you put some faith in so that you can use a couple of buffs to help with your defenses and help with like healing over long engagements, stuff like that. Or you could have like a hybrid build that's maybe a glass cannon, but you like really scaled up your arcane so that your sword does so your weapon does incredible bleed damage. Check out this guy in Shadow of the Erdtree. But like you can have sort of hybrid builds because there are so many items that help sort of realize those builds, and there's so much content in Elden Ring that you will level up to the point where you can sort of have hybrid builds. And that's even without, particularly like farming, in specific spots too. It's so damn easy to make a hybrid build in Elden Ring. Faith has got to be the most useful stat in the game. It does everything. I mean, it is one of the it is a really useful stat, especially when the game gifts you just super powerful faith spells. I mean, like, I think you're pretty much guaranteed to get, like, let's see. So you get a really powerful faith spell every time you go through Lanedale, like the Lanedale capital. Like, even if you just ignore everything and go straight for the bosses for progression's sake, the first time through, you will get a good faith spell before you fight Morgott. And then when you come back around, you'll get another really good faith spell before you fight Godfrey. It's like, the game is throwing these spells at you, which is not the same for a lot of the other ones, which also kind of locks them behind very specific content, but that's a different issue. But anyway, let's get back to what he's talking about.
Sir, if you're having fun, you're playing the game right. That doesn't mean we have all comparative experiences, but like, holy shit, guys, can we just move past this? Anyway, my approach to these games is from 3 simple rules. I must kill the boss myself. If I am dealing damage, I must also be risking receiving damage, although I fudge that a little bit here and there, and I don't use anything non-renewable during fights, unless strictly necessary. I may do other runs later that don't abide by these, but this is how I like to do my first playthrough so I can dig into fights and have a pleasant struggle learning mechanics and then overcoming them. If you are on the opposite end of my method and enjoy destroying bosses by using every trick and ability available to you, safely casting magic, tailoring your gear to maximize defenses and exploit the boss's weaknesses, and summoning a friend or using an ash spirit, then if that's fun to you, then that's great. Your playstyle is valid, and your boss kill is valid. It's just that we're playing entirely different games at that point and don't share much in common to compare experiences. We're like 2 people that went to the gym and did different workouts. We can tell each other how we feel as we leave, but because we did totally different things, we can't compare them fairly. But we don't have to. The open world and these build and playstyle choices are Elden Ring's way of providing difficulty options, accessibility methods, and also more fun ways to play for different people.
This is one thing where I think I understand where he's coming from with this, because there's the audience of the Souls sort of series has had like slow growth over time, and then it exploded at different points, right? Like Demon Souls was a relatively niche game, but people liked it. I think it's sold around maybe like 2 million copies at this point. I forget the number. I put it at the end of my Dark Souls 3 video, but it was like enough for it to be a success, right? Dark Souls comes out and then does way better and reaches so many people, becomes sort of a genre definer, right, in like 2011. Then you got Dark Souls 2 and Bloodborne, which both sell decently, and then Dark Souls 3 comes out and it sells over 10 million copies, like over 10 million. That's a big deal, especially for a company like From Software, which is not some huge mega corporation like Activision or something, right, or Ubisoft or whatever, right? And then you get Elden Ring come out, and last I checked, it was over like 25 million copies sold. There's a lot of fucking people that bought Elden Ring, right? We're talking like peak Call of Duty numbers in terms of player counts, right? And yeah, Sheep, it's just the community has very strange growth spurts. I think part of the reason why Elden Ring had a big growth spurt is because it does a I'll say a decent job of allowing sort of normies to come in and do a lot of the overworld stuff, with all the stuff in like Limgrave in the early game, all the over areas. Those areas are not too hard. You get healing back after defeating groups, after defeating little scarabs. Like there's a bunch of little groups of enemies that aren't too hard to deal with, in the like upper area. So it feels like you're progressing. It feels like you're overcoming the challenge, and then you start, like, and I've mentioned this, I think, in the last stream, where you kind of have different levels of difficulty as you get deeper into the game. The overworld stuff tends to be the easiest, quote unquote, or roughly the simplest to understand by comparison to later stuff. Then you get stuff that's in like the caves, where it's just like a small little pathway that leads you to a boss. Then you get something like the dungeons with like the little that go underground, and you get all the little imp dudes, and then like you have to figure out the puzzle to get to the boss. Then you start getting like major areas, you know, like Stormvale Castle, Redmane Keep, Raya Lucaria Academy, Volcano Manor, Lanedale. The areas where things kind of kick up in terms of like the number of enemies, the amount of enemies you're expected to deal with, and how difficult the encounters are. Then you cap off with the main bosses, right, which have very unique encounters. They're not repeated often, and then have sort of like reached the point where you have kind of reached the top of the difficulty list by the time you reach the final bosses that are the final main bosses of the game, so to speak. You know, so there's definitely a difficulty curve that normies can enjoy a lot and helps introduce people to this style of combat with a lot of easy encounters in the overworld in the beginning. And then as they get better, they begin to learn the mechanics more, they begin to get a little bit better, then they can sort of tier up as they go through the game, right? And that's one thing that I will give Elden Ring as like a good thing, is like they do a pretty decent job of scaling things where you can jump into Elden Ring as a total newbie and slowly learn the mechanics with little groups of enemies that won't be too difficult to kill unless you're just directly trying to play the game like it's Assassin's Creed or something, right? Like you'll like normies will learn through playing through those little groups on the surface, right? But as you get deeper into the game, you'll start to see more of that sort of Souls level difficulty and that type of difficulty, you know, sort of throughout. See, you go through DS1 where stuff like summoning was really encouraged because of icons like Solaire, and now if you summon, you're terrible. It is kind of back and forth. And this is what the series has had a really strange record with summoning, just in general, whether it be an NPC or other players. And I think that there's it seems like From Software doesn't really know what to do when it comes to summoning certain people at certain times. Like one thing that I like about these games, or one thing that I like about the games that I wish was left, was sort of the way that the boss is, right? Like one thing that bothered me in Dark Souls 2 was how if you summon anybody, the boss gets a huge defense buff, right? Where instead of taking normal damage, instead of taking 100% of normal damage, now they take, or instead of having 100% of their defenses, it goes up to 200 if you summon somebody, and it goes up to 300% if you summon a second person, right? Like it's that thing where it's such an arbitrary like difficulty scaling thing just to make the boss compensate for the fact there is a group, which the other games in the series have made it where they just give the boss more health. I don't think that's a good plan either. I think they have a hard time dealing with the fact that multiple players can be in a boss fight at once, and you can see that with the way the AI works, right? The AI oftentimes will not account for the fact that there are more than one player. And I feel like this game runs into a unique problem where it's not accounting for multiple players, but the best they could do is just have enemies have big AoE moves that can tap multiple players at once, right? Especially when you get to stuff like in the late game, like with uh, Godfrey and his like huge like sort of slam abilities and that shit. Radigan with his like big AoE moves, the Elden Beast with its AoE moves. There's just a lot of. It seems like all the bosses have been given a lot of AoE shit, largely because it's to make it harder, but also to try to account for the fact that there can be multiple players, which is one thing that I think these games just have a hard time balancing. Which I don't blame them. It's difficult to balance a fight when there's two people, especially when the AI oftentimes can't handle it, right? And that is a problem. So I mean, that's a different sort of issue than some of the other stuff. But yes, summoning sort of being a rare occurrence and now becoming normal is it's just it's just one of those things where like the summoning system has been all over the place all the time, and just there are a lot of times where like summoning is good, but there are times where summoning is sort of expected, which makes the encounter function worse if you do it on your own. And this is one thing that I've brought up a couple times too, is just that but if you take a group of enemies against a player from 5 to 10, and then give the player a summon, which summons 1 to 3 enemies to help, have you made the encounter better, or have you just increased the number of entities that are in this combat? Right? Has the combat experience actually improved by adding more enemies and more friends, or have you just made it more chaotic and sort of frenetic because there's so much going on? Right? And that's kind of my point to make about having all these summoning positions around the world. Right? Is just, it's like they put summoning positions in specific spots because they probably want you to use summons a lot, and they also think, or at least it seems like they think, that having summons negates some of the ganky bullshit that you will get throughout the game. And I would disagree. Anyway, I gotta catch up on chat. I'm sorry. George R. R. Martin might also be pulling its weight in terms of grabbing people's attention. That's true, but at the same time, if I didn't know George R. R. Martin had a hand in this game, this would seem like typical From Software to me. Like, the only thing that seems like a George R. R. Martin thing is the naming of all the shit around here, right? Like Margit, Morgott, Moog, Godwin, Godfrey, Goderoy, like all this. Like, George R. R. Martin seems really lazy with names, where he just like changes like 2 letters and now it's a new character name. And you see that when you look at like anything that he's like written. But like, George R. R. Martin's involvement from this, I don't see, because this just seems like typical From Software shit. It's just the names are a little more Martin-y, if you want to call it that, you know? PTSD of summons one-shotting bosses. Yeah, there are a lot of summons throughout the series in general that I've just been able to just kick ass. I mean, probably most notably is Solaire, right? Like, he's incredibly powerful against the Bell Gargoyles in Dark Souls 1. Like, incredibly powerful. You know, I can concede that that is terrible. Summons shouldn't be beating bosses for you, especially with how free they are to use. Yeah, but I also think it's just the thing where, there's so much. There are so many different summons that do different things that kind of cause problems for the game, because, at that point it's, is the difficulty made expecting the summon to be there, or is it made not expecting the summon, and the summon radically changes the difficulty in your favor, where things become a little bit more sort of like less focused because they're expecting you to summon in some instances but not in others. Like, a good example would be like the Melania fight, right? Like, Melania is sort of the ultimate get good boss that they made in this game, and I'm saying that including the DLC, right? Because ultimately I think Melania is still the hardest boss of the game, even after the DLC. But the way her fight works is you have to be on your top game against her, right? Especially if you don't use a summon, right? If you don't summon anybody, you have to be top tier, like, you are playing as best as you can given your build and what you can do to fight her, right? Because she has a lot of moves that can be very damaging, very hard to dodge, and also the healing aspect puts her over the edge, where you not only have to be able to fight her and maximize your damage, you also have to maximize the amount of times that you do not get hit, right? And so that makes her a very interesting fight in that regard, and that's part of the reason why she's sort of considered the Sekiro boss of the game, because Sekiro has that very different combat system. But it's just summons radically change how several fights work, right? And I found that there are several bosses where I will summon and won't, because they're just functionally not going to be useful, or they're going to be blatantly overpowered in certain situations, right? Like the fight against Rykard, I do not summon for, because there's no real point, right? Like, the summon you summon is probably, unless it's a ranged summon, they're probably going to do very measly damage to Rykard, right? Because he has a bajillion health points, and his only weakness is to something really cheap to begin with, like Destined Death, or the spear thing that's in the arena. I'm forgetting the name. It's one of those things where he's very sort of red light, green light in terms of what summons you use. Whereas with Melania, I'm always summoning, because I find that fight's just hard, man. You know, especially if your build just isn't like if your build isn't sort of built to deal with some of her moves. You know, there's just a lot of things that just fuck with the way summons work and when you're supposed to use them versus not, and how they communicate that to you. It's just a very complicated sort of issue. At the same time, though, these bosses can be absolutely ridiculous. It would take hours of learning, hours. Depends on the boss, but I think that's largely true. I quite appreciate watching Jester Thomas solo Mytha. That is always fun. Jester Thomas is in that area? Yep. No, not at all. Just a random thought I had. Oh, you got my hopes up. I don't know what you mean by that, but okay. What is that? I don't know. Anyway, let's get back to this video.
And there's some beauty here in that some builds that some people find easy are ones that other people find difficult. So it's not always the same thing, although in general, there are some easier methods than others. The Dark Souls games have always had this to some extent, with kindling bonfires in Dark Souls 1 being one of the best difficulty selection methods of all time, because it's so easy to understand, so easy to use, and the base level is still a good amount of difficulty, and at the top level, it's not exactly a pushover either with that much healing. It's a great way of doing things, and for that reason, I don't understand why these games are the ones that the difficulty in gaming discussion orbits around when they do have easy modes already. They do. I don't get it. Sorry, I'm going off script. My playstyle is not the best one, but it is.
This is one thing. Him saying there are easy modes, I think, is a thing where I think I would actually argue in the opposite direction. I think there is a hard mode to these games, right? Because the way like his example with Dark Souls 1, right, with the humanity kindling and the extra Estus, I think that there is the game shows you very early on that you can have more than 5 Estus at a bonfire, right? You see that as soon as you get to Firelink Shrine, right? When you get the Estus, you get 5 from Oscar, but when you go to Firelink Shrine, you can get 10. That might get players thinking, wait a minute, I can have more than 5, right? How does that work? All right, they'll get humanity in the shrine. It's there. It's like one of the first items you can see. You know, then you see the kindling option, you know, and it'll say if you're not in human form, you need to be in human form, basically. And then you get into human form, then you kindle, then you notice your Estus amount went up, right? I think that there's a reasonable point to be made there that the developers are telling you very early on in Dark Souls 1, hey, kindling's a good idea. You should probably do it, right? Now, what I will say is that I think the hard mode of that is not kindling whatsoever, right? Just sticking with 5 Estus throughout all the encounters in the game. And this is one thing where I think that he is looking at it in a very different way than the way I would look at it, right? And this is one thing too. I don't know 100% for certain that the developers want you to play with 5 Estus or 20, right? Or 10, right? Like I have no idea what they directly intend for you to do. But I think there's a decent argument to be made that, you know, as soon as you drop into Firelink Shrine, you learn that Estus can go above 5, you gain humanity, and as soon as you rest the bonfire, you can see the Kindle option, right? Even if you can't do it yet, that option is still there. You're introducing the mechanics to players of kindling as soon as the game really starts. So I think it's fair to assume that they want you to kindle, right? Or they expect you to kindle, or at the very least pay attention and try it just to see what it does, right? And so I think that there is a sort of base level of you like I think these games don't have an easy mode, but they have sort of an intended mode, and then you have weird ways to work around that where it makes the game harder or easier depending on what you're doing, right? Like again, in Dark Souls 1 with the kindling thing, it sort of implies that you can go up to 10. And so maybe you kindle up to 10, right, through the first half of the game. And then after you get to Nito, or then after you kill Pinwheel, maybe you notice that you can kindle more often, and then you go up to 20 in certain places. You know, like maybe it's a thing where they intended you to slowly scale it up as the game goes along, but they also left the pathway open for people that really want to get that 20 Estus as soon as possible. So they allow the pathway down to Pinwheel to be open and accessible, you know, through going down there and then coming back up to allow for kindling up to 20 very early on in the game, right? It's that thinking of sort of the long term that helps with that particular type of play, right? If you absolutely want to maximize what you're doing, you can do it, right? And you can do it pretty early in the game, right? All you have to do is get to Firelink Shrine, get to Pinwheel, get back. I mean, you're basically done. Now, granted, that's not easy because the skeletons are hard, the catacombs can be annoying, and getting down to Pinwheel is not the easiest thing in the world. But that option is still relatively quick to do, like in the early game of Dark Souls 1, you know. But that's not playing on easy mode per se, as much as just optimizing what you're doing, right? Because playing on easy mode in all these games would essentially be, you know, what's your sort of main stat that you use as your particular build? Split your levels between health and that stat, and you'll usually be pretty good. You'll usually be fine in between those two things, you know. And that's just it's a very complicated sort of thing to talk about when it comes to sort of how, what the easy mode is, right? Or if there even is an easy mode, because whenever we say an easy mode or a hard mode, we are usually using the base point of there is an intended difficulty range, and then there's something that makes it easier or harder after that. Like our starting point is what the game is, and then how we change that is how we play it, which I think is part of the fun of these games, the fact that they don't have a difficulty slider, but just that the game has mechanics, and if you use them in particular ways, the game becomes harder or easier depending on your choices, right? I think that's part of the charm. I just do a Moog Spear build for Melania, summon Mimic Tier, spam L2, and pray. A lot of people do a lot of crazy shit against her, but it's kind of the thing where I mentioned this in my Modern Warfare Trilogy commentary that, making things crazier isn't always the best option, but it can be fun, right? Like I made a commentary of the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare Trilogy from back in like 07 to 2011, right? And Modern Warfare 2 was a lot of fun because of how crazy and broken shit was in that game compared to the original Modern Warfare, right? But then they tweaked things and balanced things in Modern Warfare 3 to make it more sort of even-handed, palatable, and fair, right? I think this game is suffering from a similar problem as Modern Warfare 2, where they kind of give players a whole bunch of freaky shit they can use, and then it's really hard to balance things after that fact because you've got so much crazy shit you can do, to the point where the balancing often ends up being the boss just does crazy damage and has crazy long combos and has crazy amounts of health. I mean, that's really kind of where we end up with this. It's just sort of, they make players crazy, then they compensate by giving the bosses big numbers. And that tends to be the thing where we're kind of at in this series, which is part of the reason why I'm probably not moving forward after the DLC to Elden Ring. It's just, the game's getting so crazy to the point where I'd rather just play something else than have to deal with a boss that, has a massive AoE move followed by a long combo that also heals them or ends up blowing up half the arena. At this point, I don't care about the spectacle anymore. I don't care about, how difficult stuff is. I just want the fight to be engaging, where I don't have to back up for 5 minutes while their combo's going. And I also don't get killed by a single move, which is a big problem in the late game of Elden Ring. I'm so mad they nerfed that skill for PvE because you have to stand still to get the damage off. It's too late to balance it now, I would say, because they would just nerf our crazy shit without balancing the boss's crazy shit. Yeah, and that's part of the problem too, is the more normies come into this franchise, the more unfair difficulty is going to seem like the main point of this series, right? Because part of the problem with looking at From Software stuff is review sites and stuff like that, right? Dark Souls 2 has noticeable problems compared to Dark Souls 1 and 3, but it has the highest rating out of all three of them from a lot of review sites because of the difficulty, right? Because the game kills people more often in Dark Souls 2 than Dark Souls 3 or 1 for these reviewers, right? And people assume that kind of difficulty is the point of this series. It's kind of masochistic, right? They view it as sort of a masochistic thing, whereas people that appreciate all of From Software's work understand it to be difficult but fair, right? And Elden Ring is something that has drastically pushed that line sort of to its extreme, where, and I've mentioned this several times across different videos and streams, where I feel like From Software is beginning to hit their brick wall with sort of the difficult but fair angle. And I think that's going to start adversely affecting them in the future because this combat system is getting sort of played out to the point where numbers are getting so high that enemies have a single attack that can insta-kill you. And that's how you deal with the player as a developer, or you deal with the boss by using some crazy thing to avoid it. Like when I played Shadow of the Erdtree, I had heavy armor on, a talisman that reduced, I forget if it was fire or lightning damage. I had one of those on, and I had upwards of 2,000 health, and Bale one-shot me with a single attack, dealing like over 2,000 damage after getting scatter fragments, after having defenses, after having like buffs and things to help with that. That's just absurd, right? You just cranked the numbers to an absurd degree at that point, and it's just it's a thing that I've mentioned as well where um it's a thing as well where the difficulty is eventually going to reach a point where it's no different than an arcade game, like an old arcade game would be, where you basically have to get through the fight and you have X amount of lives, right? Or you have one life, and if you die, you have to start over. We're getting to that point, right? And I think Bale's probably the closest example with that attack. Even with like level 7, 8, something around there, even with all the buffs, I still got one-shotted by a DLC boss with 60 vigor, right? When I have 2,000 HP, when I have defenses, when I have talismans to negate damage. You have just cranked shit to an unreasonable degree to the point where I may as well not even have a fucking health bar in that fight. I may as well just have a life, and if I fuck it up, I die, right? Like you're getting to that point where all the encounters are going to reach that, right? And a lot of things in the DLC end up having that problem. Where just there's so much damage dealt in like a combo or an attack where you just can't fucking get through it. Waterfowl Dance is a good example. It probably does like 4,000 damage, like in total, right? If every single hit hits you, like that's absurd, right? And I'm of the mind that no combo should. I'm of a mind that no combo should have enough damage in it to completely kill you, right? Or it should be balanced in a way where you don't get hit by subsequent attacks when you're tagged at certain points in the combo, right? But that's a thing that we can debate for years. But yeah, the difficulty of these games is definitely sort of influencing the developers to make things as hard as shit and try to make everything a spectacle when it's mechanically going to become very sort of narrow-minded. When you make bosses that look amazing but mechanically are very sort of green light, red light in terms of fighting them. Question: have you seen Matthew Matos's Lost Art of Demon Souls video? I have seen it, but it's been a number of years since I rewatched it. So I think he's made similar points of sort of like how to arbitrarily increase difficulty, but I'd have to rewatch the video to be more familiar with it. I have seen it, but I haven't watched it in years. I don't think I've ever been one-shot in any Souls game but this one. This one has the most one-shots, and it is nauseating. Yeah, well, it's one thing that I see a lot of people fight back on by saying, oh, they give you purposely low health in the early game to make you want to level your vigor up, and they increase the soft caps, from like 40 and 50 up to 60 so that you can have even more health. And it's like, yeah, the bosses can still one-shot you, which is the problem. Or, even worse, they can combo stomp you, right? The Fire Giant is a really good example of that, right? If you get stuck in his flame attack, in his little like flame from underneath attack, that does enough damage to kill you. Like unless you've got some fire negation or just unless you've got like fire negation stuff, you're probably going to die in 2 hits from that shit, right? On top of the fact that his shield slam deals an absurd amount of damage, right? Like the bosses are getting to the point where just they do too much fucking damage. And I think that's part of the reason why I kind of want to retire the series. And don't get me wrong, I enjoy playing Elden Ring and the DLC, but the difficulty is going in a direction where I think it's going to become more annoying than engaging. And I think that's kind of where I'm at personally. And you can free to disagree. You're free to do whatever you want. Like you're a person, I'm a person. We'll agree to disagree and go our own ways. But I'm just saying, as a Souls player that really enjoys the Souls games, I'm getting to the point where I want to tap out. I don't want to. I'm getting to the point where I don't want to get good anymore, right? Like after beating all the bosses in the games, I don't want to get good anymore. You know, and that's kind of part of the problem is I've sort of reached as much From Software as I can take. So I'm probably just gonna dip out and just play other games because I mean there's billions of other games out there. So just and everyone kind of has their line with how far they're willing to go with this kind of combat and difficulty. So maybe I'm hitting mine early just because I've played the crap out of these games. Like actually, let me pull up something real quick. I need to check and see how many hours I have in this Souls series total. All right, so in Dark Souls Remastered, I've got 477 hours. In Dark Souls 2, I've got 927 hours. All right, so we'll roughly say that's like 1,400 hours. Dark Souls 3, I've got 659 hours. So we're up to like basically 2,000 hours across the Dark Souls trilogy, right? I've got another 785 hours in Elden Ring, not counting what I'm going to continue playing for a video I'm working on, right? So I've got about 2,800 hours across this series, not including Demon Souls and Bloodborne. I love these games. I have a lot of fun with these games, but I also have a lot of problems with them, especially in the direction they're going. And it's just this is kind of my spiel, and I guess I guess this is my old man ranting. It's not like the good old days, but it's just I think they're reaching a point where they kind of have to reinvent what they're doing as opposed to just scaling things up. Yeah, I've hit my limit as well. I'm young, but after this DLC, I can't take this shit for much longer. Yeah. None of the games had difficulty that made me think this is unobtainable or yeah, this is my limit and I can't go any further. Yep. Your rant reminded me of that video, specifically the quote, "The Souls games aren't about outsmarting your opponents, it's about pressing the roll button at the right time." Yeah. Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing is like part of the charm of the early games actually is sort of how their gimmicks worked. That's one reason why I go back to Dark Souls 1 a lot and have a lot of fun replaying it, even though I know how to like deal with everything, right? Like a good example actually of the differences between the end game of Elden Ring and the end game of Dark Souls, right? Games that are a decade apart, right? Is look at how the end game fights sort of match up, right? So let's just compare the four Lord Souls and Gwyn to the last 5 fights of Elden Ring, just for example, just as a purely base game, right? Just the last 5 fights of each game, basically. All right. Nito, he fights in an arena with other undead that you can aggro, but you don't always aggro all of them. And Nito also does damage to them, right? So that makes an interesting dynamic of you attacking him during the openings and using his explosion move against them or his attacks against them, right? That creates an interesting gimmick in and of itself outside of the fact that you're fighting a boss, right? That's something that makes that fight unique and interesting and dynamic. Then you get Seath with his invincibility crystal. That fight is probably the most simple of the Lord Soul fights, right? But you have to break a crystal and then you can fight him, right? And then he's a big boss. He like flops around his little tentacles everywhere. It's very hentai. But he's probably the most boring of the bosses in my opinion of the 4 Lord Soul bosses. But his fight still has some sort of small gimmick that impacts the fight in a little way. Then you have the Bed of Chaos, which is the worst boss in the game, but its gimmick is very unique, where it's basically a puzzle boss, more so than an actual boss that you just slowly dodge and just hack and slash, a health bar down, right? Like you have to hit one point, you have to hit another point, then you have to hit the bug in the middle without getting smashed to death, burned, or thrown into a pit of death, right? Even though the mechanics of that fight suck, it is still aesthetically different than the other endgame bosses, right? Then you get the 4 Kings. It's a DPS race. You start with one, and every, I think, 45 seconds, another king will spawn. right? So it's a DPS race. You need to deal as much fucking damage as you can in that time frame, and you know that going in on repeat playthroughs, right? And then you have Gwyn, who is a hard-hitting but parryable boss that's roughly human-sized and is meant to sort of be an anti-climax boss of looking at this god and how far he's fallen, right? But he still hits pretty hard, right? And you take those 5 fights into account. They are all very different, right? In size, in scope, in how they apply their various gimmicks and stuff like that. They're all very unique. Whether they're good or not is sort of besides the point. But like they're very different, right? Now let's look at the last 5 fights of Elden Ring, for example. And I'm sticking with just sort of the 5 fights that are sort of required to beat the game. I'm not talking like optional stuff or DLC stuff. All right, the last 5 fights are basically Malekith to the Elden Beast, right? Malekith, first phase, a lot of like ground sort of spewing moves with a lot of that sort of that magic type. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. Then his second phase hits and he becomes a glass cannon with sort of holy health drainage, right? And he's very agile, right? He's very agile, but he doesn't have a ridiculous health bar either, right? So he's very much sort of a glass cannon type of boss, right? Whether you like that gimmick or not, up for debate on whether it's good or not, but that's sort of the gimmick, right? Then you get Prick the All-Knowing, whatever his name is. There's so many Gideon. There's so many damn G names in this game. It's insane. But like you have Gideon, right? The all spamming spell fucker, right? All he does is just spam spells that deal ridiculous damage to you over and over and over. It's like, yeah, you can stun him, but he also can heal himself, and he has incredible damage and reach with all the spells, and he has spells that go all over the place in terms of what they can do and the variety of damage types they deal, right? But at the end of the day, it's just kind of an NPC spamming you with spells, which is pretty much the same as like an online fight, right? All right, then after him, you have Godfrey, right? He does a lot of just AoE spamming, right? Just a lot of AoE spamming, whether it be his little like cone effect in front of him or the sonic bursts he kind of shoots out. And then you have the huge explosion that has a huge radius, and just it's AoE move, AoE move, AoE move, AoE move, AoE move. And then in second phase, you get grabs and more AoE moves, right? It's kind of just AoE spam, right? That's sort of his main gimmick, is just huge AoE spam. Then you get to Radagon, right? And Radagon is attached to the Elden Beast, but I'm going to sort of differentiate them as bosses because they are technically different, even though they're packaged as one sort of fight. Like Radagon has, a decently varied move set between melee attacks, like quick little spell shots, big AoE moves, but he doesn't spam the AoE moves quite as bad as Godfrey does. But you still have a lot of AoE moves, and then you have all the problems of the other combat with delayed attacks, him being able to run across the arena very quickly, teleport in and out very quickly, and also just the amount of holy damage he does is a little ridiculous, right? But then you get to the Elden Beast, which is a fight that pretty much revolves around catch up to the boss, deal as much damage as you can, and then chase it down as it shoots holy spells at you, right? And so by the time you get to that boss and all the other ones, you've kind of dealt with different levels of sort of attack type as opposed to encounter type. And that's kind of what I'm getting at here is, it's a thing where, the bosses in Dark Souls 1 fought differently. The encounters are actually different on a strategic level, right? And that's part of the fun because you have to fight them differently. You can't fight Nito the same way you fight the Four Kings. You can't fight the Bed of Chaos the same way you fight Seath, right? You can't fight any of them the way you fight Gwyn, right? It's a very different experience between them. In the end game of Elden Ring, it devolves into what Matthew Matosa said in his video. It's not about strategy. It's about hitting the dodge button at the right time. And that's kind of where we are. And it's sad because this studio can do amazing things, right? Like, and this is one thing too. The aesthetic of all the bosses, right? The way they look and the way their movesets look are fantastic, right? I think the DLC embodies that, right? Bale's animations are beautiful, but they're a clusterfuck to deal with when you're actually fighting him, right? Like fighting Radahn whether DLC or base game, looks great, but it has its problems too. It's just they've gotten rid of a lot of the gimmicks that people enjoyed, or the dynamic gimmicks that people enjoyed, and they've stuck with kind of the old gimmicks that, and they've stuck with the old gimmicks that people are kind of, I would say I'm tired of, right? Like Rykard is a repeat of Yorm, who is a repeat of fuck, what's that enemy called in Demon Souls? It's the thing in the sky that flies around. Is it the Storm Lord, the Storm King of Storms, whatever it is? Right? Like, they've repeated that gimmick so many times of an enemy that you have to use a specific weapon against in order to deal decent damage. It's like, yeah, you don't have to do that, but we really want you to do that. And they just continually make that fight more ridiculous by taking the enemy out of the air with Yorm, putting him on the ground where he can chase you constantly. Then you've got Rykard, who has massive AoE moves, on top of the fact that the weapon will not even hit him sometimes in the arena, right? They've taken the gimmick and just made it harder and more complicated. It's like, could you just make a new gimmick, please? Something. Right? It's just, it's just they've made a lot of good gimmick fights in the past, and it seems like they've dropped them in favor of repeatable gimmicks that are really one-dimensional, but they just make them harder in terms of like what you have to deal with while dealing with the gimmick. You know what I mean? Oh, anyway, I need to go through the chat. You guys have been blowing up. Blowing up the chat. I miss those days. Now, for a lot of dangerous attacks, you need to roll in a specific direction, maybe circle strafe or some insane strategy. Yeah. The damage Gideon is straight up overtuned, and he casts an unavoidable debuff. What the fuck from Safra? Yep. Sir Gideon off near. They're all spamming. Yes. Godfrey, the first AoE Lord, indeed. Godfrey the Grappler, straight out of Baki. More Bale compliments. I knew Vangeris loved him. As a thing, From Software's like aesthetic work has only improved over time, but I hate how Godfrey literally bends space and time just to delay a grab attack. Typical Elden slop. They finally gave us Torrent for Elden Beast. I know, right? But why the fuck do we have to have him in the first place? But this is one thing, right? Like the Elden Beast, if you took away the Elden Beast's ability to go underwater or underground or whatever you want to call it, and then like run away, like if they just took away the beast's ability to run away from us, I consider that a fix, right? Giving us, again, they create bullshit, then they create a solution to the bullshit when we didn't need the bullshit to begin with. Why? Looks great. You can see Phase 2 Promised Consort. I mean, I'm in like in terms of like how it looks, right? Like I think the aesthetically it looks good, on sort of like a technical level of it is impressive visually what they're able to do, But in terms of actually fighting him while a lot of the shit's going down, yeah, that gets into a fucking mess after 2 years. Yeah. It would be like fighting Gwyn and then they allowed parry on him in a patch 3 years after Dark Souls 1 came out. That's the kind of energy we'd have. Anyway, we need to get back to this video. I think I watched like 5 minutes and then went on a rant.
They do. I don't get it. Sorry, I'm going off script. My playstyle is not the best one, but it is the best for me. Elden Ring is simultaneously the most difficult and the easiest game FromSoft has made because of this. It is easier to collect fighting options than ever, easier to get a summon to help than ever, easier to grind out levels for power than ever, and even not feel like you're grinding that much at all while doing so because there's just so much side content to do. You can still fight bosses at level 1 naked with your bare fists if you like, and the range of difficulty that starts around there all the way up to using everything you can possibly cram onto your character is a great thing. Not perfect, of course, but great. Pretty much everyone does this naturally as they play these games. Either they understand them enough to go for a type of challenge mode or easy mode, or they like the idea of role-playing a type of character and stick within the bounds of what that character would be capable of. The starting classes are proof of this and also a great way to get into this mindset. There can still be some problems here with difficulty on your first time through not being set right for some playstyles, either too easy or too hard, but That's another problem made worse from open.
There's the one thing that you can see during these clips when he's showing this sort of enemy, sort of combat encounter. The Mimic tier is doing the delayed shit that a lot of players get caught out for, right? Where you try to roll, you mistime it, you get hit, but the game still registers you want to roll, so you roll too early and then get hit by the next combo, right? The next part of the combo or the next hit, right? Which is incredibly annoying. Yeah. Oh, yes, Promise Consort. We're really seeing the split in the community from this game. I mean, Promise Consort Radon really does feel like the developers trying to give us fan service and fucking it up. Like, it feels like they really wanted to give players what they wanted, but then when players got that, they were like, oh, I actually don't want that. You know? This is one thing, right? Radon's probably my favorite fight in the game. You know, I like second phase Malekith, but that's second phase, not first phase. But Radon's probably my favorite fight in the base game, right? Just because I think they did his gimmick really well. You know, he's a very powerful entity. He's set up to be a very powerful entity, and you fight him as a part of a large group trying to take him down. I think that gimmick works, right? And it helps build Radon up as a tough enemy that could sort of rival Melania, right? I think aesthetically it works, mechanically it works, and I think it's a fun fight because it's essentially an army versus one dude that had the power to stop the stars. It's just a cool concept, and I think they executed it really well. I mean, his story is also cool too. Like, I think he's a complete package. He's sort of the Artorias of Elden Ring, in my opinion, right? Base game Radon. Now DLC Radon, very, very different. I mean, he's basically not Radon, right? He just fights like Radon. But, you know, just base game Radon, I think, is kind of the Artorias of that game. Melania divided the community. Summons divided the community. Consort Radon divided the community. Yeah, there's a lot of things that there are a lot of divides in this community, and I think it's just because I think From Software is fucking with too much different shit, right? And that's one thing that I want to do when I play through Sekiro, because I've played a little bit of it, but I've not beaten it. And the thing is, from several people I trust that have similar opinions to mine about the Soul series in terms of its trajectory and where it's going, I've heard a lot of people say that Sekiro is sort of peak From Software combat design, where it's actually about skill, not just dodging at the right time. And I want to get good at Sekiro. One, because I bought it. Also, two, because I think it'd be fun to stream. But I do think that, like, I wonder if Sekiro will be sort of the cap off to my FromSoft experience, because it's the last game of theirs that I want to play that I have not played yet that is new, right? Or at least new to me. So I really want to get into that. Yeah, that split is between phase 1 and phase 2. Yeah, like phase 1 Radon's not too bad, but that phase 2 thing really just overkills it. I like phase 1. We'll never like the cross slash. It's bullshit, but phase 2 is unsalvageable for me. Get rid of it. I thought you were talking about DLC, Radon Vangeris. I was going to look shell-shocked. Nah. Sekiro was about skill, but there is some of that usual FromSoft bullshit sprinkled in. Yeah. Well, I kind of assume that whenever you get a From Software game, you're going to get at least 10% of bullshit in the game, which I'm okay with. I mean, like, I don't, you know, as long as the bullshit doesn't exceed like half the game, I'm usually going to be okay, right? Or I shouldn't say that. If the bullshit doesn't exceed a quarter of the game, I can deal with it, right? But Elden Ring is kind of a game where just there's a lot of bullshit everywhere, you know, and it's the kind of like Dark Souls 2 bullshit is very different than Elden Ring bullshit, right? Like Dark Souls 2 bullshit is just really simple, cheap ways to kill you. Elden Ring has all the strengths of the Souls-like combat, but they've done everything they can to fuck with the flow of that combat, right? So there's not as many ways out in Elden Ring as there are in Dark Souls 2 in terms of how to deal with the bullshit, you know? A lot of divides, yes, it almost validates the Frenzied Flame ending. Yeah, anyway. I'm ranting more about Elden Ring than like this video at this point, so let's just see where we're going.
For some playstyles, either too easy or too hard, but That's another problem made worse from open world level balancing and might actually be outright impossible to solve effectively in a game with this much freedom. Some responsibility is always going to be on the player to do this right, and not always on the game developer. But hey, From's guilty here too. So then why is my biggest issue with the game related to this? Well, simply put, Elden Ring made me feel like I was playing the game wrong, and that my playstyle and choices that I used for all the other games in this series were no longer valid. Let's do a big rewind back through the whole series. Firstly, though, I want to quickly justify lumping these games together because Sekiro is obviously quite different from the others, and Elden Ring is too. Souls-like is a weird word, and it isn't exactly one I'm fond of because it's semantically awkward, but it's stuck and become a standardized term. Some people argue against it because they don't realize that it's made up of two equally important parts. They just see the souls and not the like. Like doesn't mean identical. It's also not clone either. It means just that. The games are alike. They share enough similarities that they can be comfortably grouped in proximity with each other as a subgenre. The use of difficulty, bonfire-type checkpoints, high-commitment attacks, some sort of Estus Flask that refreshes on death, bloodstains, stamina systems, atmosphere, fog doors, themes, even the scale of the world and how the camera feels to operate while playing. There are so many other elements too that could be thrown in here, but the basic gist is that if you have enough of these, but not all, then you can say the game is a Souls-like. Just
This is one thing that he's like doing right. It's one of those things where like every time I hear people talk about Souls, like all I can think of is Pyrocynical saying Dark Souls is the Dark Souls of Dark Souls, and like there's so much in that statement of how people read into what saying the Dark Souls of X is, like the blank is the Dark Souls of blank, sort of a statement, and what that means in terms of like what the fuck does that actually mean? Because it tends to be a phrase that people would say, and then people would interpret it very differently across different sort of like thought spectrums. You know what I mean? It's just one of those things that I keep thinking of, where it's just like, like the different games is like, and it's usually like a sign of like quality to some people, but other times it's like difficulty, and it's just like, what do you actually mean? Listen to him, make chaos take the world. Did you bounce off Sekiro? Yes. I forget when I bought Sekiro, but like I got it. I played a couple hours of it, and I kept trying to like get through it, but I just couldn't. Part of the problem too is that I play like all my games on PC pretty much, and the PC port of Sekiro is not good. Like all the controls are in Xbox controls, and so I have no idea where they actually are on the keyboard, and I have to look them up. And I often forget like what those buttons do, right? So like it's a lot of extra work to remember how shit works in those games. Whereas there's a consistency with the Souls games, right? Like Dark Souls 2 and 3 have Xbox controls for the PC release, but because I can map my controls to similar controls as Dark Souls 1 and Elden Ring, I can kind of get past that barrier. Whereas with Sekiro, there are a lot of different things you do with the buttons. Like the buttons do different shit, right? So I can't adapt as quickly as I'd like to. I also just haven't put enough time into the game. It's very different from what I'm used to, and so I need to spend some time with it and try to get used to it. Top tier mimic AI does one attack and then lets himself get hit repeatedly. Yep, got me too. Got back into it a while ago and loved it. That's what I'm hoping will happen to me. I would love to love I would love to love a game. I just want to have good games, But anyway, let's get back to what he's talking about.
The gist is that if you have enough of these, but not all, then you can say the game is a Souls-like, just in the same way that you can say Fallout 4 and Doom Eternal are both first-person shooters, obviously, but they are incredibly different games. If these games were in a genre that were just emerging right now, like if we were in an alternative timeline where first-person shooters were only just being made, then I guarantee you that these two would be having the same kind of discussions that we have right now about Souls-like. These aren't comparable, we can't put these in the same thing, and yeah, I get it, but, genres are dumb and they're just there for classifications. We just need to move on. So many off-script moments in this one. Streamer Joe's coming through. Again, Sekiro is the clear outlier here and the closest of these from breaking away from the realm of Souls-likes, but it's easy to forget that Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Demon Souls are also very different because of their healing systems. The way that healing works in games is one of the most important things for dictating how the game can function in terms of not just difficulty, but also constructing gameplay. I've said this a few times in past videos already, so I'll be quick. Well, for me. Your health bar in any game is the amount of mistakes you are allowed to make before you have to retry. If the game is generous with checkpoints and has very short challenges, then those mistakes might be limited to 1, like in Celeste. If your game has a healing system, then this changes the health bar to being short-term mistakes, and your healing is the system that refills them, long-term mistakes. So if you have virtually unlimited healing that can be applied instantly with no downside, like in Breath of the Wild, then the only way to lose is by making too many short-term mistakes without realizing that you need to heal or choosing to not engage with the healing system. Other games...
This is one weird thing, right, that I mentioned in the previous stream is how he uses Skyrim footage and talks about Breath of the Wild a lot. And I understand that Nintendo's like notoriously bad for taking down like content about their games on YouTube. But it's one of those things where all the points he makes about Breath of the Wild are very applicable to Skyrim. So why not just say Skyrim? You know? I don't know. That's more of like an editing nitpick from me. It's just very it's very odd.
That have automatically regenerating health encourage switching between different modes. Go offensive and risk taking damage, and then play evasively and defensively for a bit until your short-term mistakes meter fills up again and you can jump back into the fray. This can actually be a very thrilling system if done properly, but it isn't in Call of Duty, and that both states of play are developed enough to feel like you're having fun whether you are attacking or evading. Games like Hollow Knight combine both in that you need to be successful while offensive to earn the capability to try to pick a moment to heal. Then there are games like Dark Souls, which instead drain the potential mistakes you can make from your health bar and bottle them instead. If your HP is 4 or 5 mistakes, then your flask may have 20 to 30, depending on the balancing. The trick is that you have to keep track of this and, similar to Hollow Knight, pick the correct moment to heal, so it's not completely mindless. It's easy to understand how important this is if you imagine all of these allowed mistakes were given to you all at once. You wouldn't need to keep track of your health anymore because you could easily go into a frenzy on bosses and kill them before they could kill you. Bosses usually don't have a healing system because they are already in this mode. You have to exploit all the mistakes they are allowed to make through their big health bars. This system is fantastic for difficult boss encounters and enemy gauntlets through levels, since it means you can die very quickly if you're not playing well enough in a short window, but also isn't crushingly difficult if you do make a mistake here and there in a longer window of time. However, the healing found in this system is finite under most conditions. If you get a message rated up or get lucky after killing a monster, you have a chance to get some healing back, but it's so rare that I'm going to dismiss it. The finite nature of the healing, coupled with the game's intent for high difficulty, so you feel like you've accomplished something by beating it, means that damage has to be avoidable for the game to function fairly, or at all in my opinion. All damage has to be predictable and preventable. None of this has changed since my first video, and the challenge of the game is learning the ways you can predict enemy attacks and then get yourself out of harm's way while dealing damage back when you can.
And this is one thing, like I completely agree with a lot of stuff he's saying right here. You know, it's like it's about your openings versus their openings, and if you find the right opening to maximize what you're doing, you know, and that's part of the fun of this combat is the rhythm of it, you know, where you go back and forth. Maybe you hit the boss. Maybe they tag you. Maybe you find an opening to heal, and then you go back to like dodging and stuff like that. It's that kind of dance. That's part of the fun. And one reason why Elden Ring gets kind of tedious after a while is because you're spending so much time dodging that you're not really doing anything. You're just sort of mashing the same button over and over and over. And that becomes boring after a while because, especially when you can run away from an enemy while they do their combo, and it just keeps on going. It's like it's that arbitrary extension of playtime by just making combos last longer instead of making them like faster or more varied in terms of the directions you need to dodge them in.
Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Demon Souls aren't like this. They have effectively unlimited sources of healing through life gems, healing grass, and blood vials, which drop from enemies as you kill them. Bloodborne is technically the closest here because healing is more restricted in boss fights since you can't get more blood vials to drop while you're in them, but the regain recovery option to hit the boss back after taking damage in a vampiric vengeance is quite a potent way to stay alive on many fights. So it's Dark Souls 1, 3, and Elden Ring that stay the closest to this limited system through flask healing. Yes, there are some other ways to heal with humanity, embers, equipment, and spells, but these either also use limited resources or are unreasonably time-consuming to gather, or are so slow, like the life regen rings, that I find it easy to ignore them. If you disagree, then you can disregard this whole bit on healing if you like. Elden Ring's biggest problem is that it has this healing system, but has many fights with attacks that are unreactable and sources of damage that are unavoidable. For most of these, you still can prevent and predict damage, but they require such tedious, drawn-out tactics that I do not consider it reasonable.
I mean, he's pretty much explaining it while showing a move that I would show. You know?
Or they require specific build choices, or even changing your build entirely for a part of the fight to be something you can safely deal with. Even still, with all of this build changing in mind, there are a couple instances of attacks in this game being unavoidable damage and guilty of unfairly sapping some of your healing power.
Now, that's one thing that's one thing that is sort of a thing that I get where he's coming from, but he's technically wrong because you can no damage all of these games. It's just in this game it becomes incredibly complicated given all the other shit that you have to put up with, like this move. It's incredibly hard to dodge this move, but I'm sure you can, right? People have done it. So I get where he's coming from, but he's technically wrong about that. Like, all of this damage is avoidable. It's just a matter of how you position yourself. But that knowledge requires a lot of testing.
And the reason I think Elden Ring does this, the culprit here that is guilty of this truly heinous crime, is my favorite game in this list, Sekiro. This is all Sekiro's fault. Let's rewind again.
Okay.
Attacks in these games come in two types, melee and ranged. Spells that create damage zones on the floor I am including in the ranged category, although they're fairly rare. These categories can be combined because they follow the same two potential flavors in how they can be constructed. The first is a straightforward attack that you can sight read. These are the bread and butter of Souls-like attacks. Sight reading means that you can see the enemy is preparing for a swing and then dodge it when the attack starts to come at you. Think the most simple type of sword swings and projectiles that slowly come toward you, and you can time your response to when they get to you with a roll or a block or just moving out of the way, whatever you need to do. The second type are delayed snap attacks that you have to feel out the timing on. These are trickier to explain, but you know what these are if you've played the game. The boss charges up a laser beam, and if you dodge it when the beam appears, you're too late. You just got hit. You need to dodge right before it by learning the timing from when you saw this attack a few times before this, and then repeat that test.
And these moves are the ones that I typically hate, are the ones that are so difficult to dodge that it's about timing rather than telegraphing. Like you aren't sure when this laser is going to come through until after you've already been shot by it once, right? Which I think is part of the sort of the mudding of the waters when it comes to the fair but difficult sort of argument for some of these moves.
Melee attacks can also be like this, with the enemy entering a stance which, after a set amount of time, releases like a loaded spring into an attack so fast that it's not reactable. You have to know the timing and dodge preemptively. The Watchdogs are a perfect example of this. With no exceptions that I can think of right now, every attack in these games is one of these two types, and an absurd amount of variety and different timings and twists are added on top of them. Even ground-based AoE attacks can either show up with a telegraph that you respond to, or have a visual or audio telegraph that you learn the timing on and then dodge.
Yeah, I don't like these moves where I have to preemptively dodge rather than react properly. Yeah. Well, again, it turns into that sort of thing where it's no longer like strategic. It's more of just sort of a rhythm game. You either dodge right, or you either dodge at the right time or you fail. And that kind of binary level of difficulty is part of the problem, like I mentioned earlier. It's that thing where it's not really telegraphing as much as the timer starts now and you need to act at this point within the timer. It's that kind of thing where it feels cheap as like a difficulty slider. It's like having something that, it's like if imagine a character with a sword swings it in a video game, and across the 3 seconds the entire hit takes, the first 2.5 seconds, or sorry, the first 2.7 seconds out of that 3 seconds is just the windup of the character raising the sword, and then in that last like 0.3 of a second, they bring the sword down. Right? That is an incredibly short window to know when that thing's coming down. Right? What I like about the old games is that if they did that same attack in the old games, they would have the first second raise the attack. They would have that first second raise the attack. The second second would have him begin to like move it a little bit, and the third second it would come down, right? So you have a beginning, middle, and end. You don't just have a start and stop. You know, you don't just have a wind up attack. You know, you have like a wind up in like sections, and then the attack actually goes through. It's not just wind up hit. You know, it's like wind up telegraph hit, and they're missing that telegraph in the middle. It's like, yeah, that is very common in this game.
Even Dark Souls 1 had this stuff with the scythe spike on Nito that you can sometimes run dodge, but it's better to roll it at a certain point in the scream telegraph that you learn is the best time to press dodge. Added on top of these two flavors are things like tracking attacks to ensure that you learn the timing instead of just strafe around the boss, short and long combos with a mixture of straightforward and delayed attacks so you can never be sure what you're going to get and have to learn the whole combo, things like breath attacks, which you can't roll or block and have to run around, but can still either be sight readable or require a timing test from when you see the beginning of the animation. Grab attacks, which are some of the worst in these games that still obey these rules, kind of, but the air in front of the enemy model becomes the attack instead of their arms or a weapon. Please stop making these from. Attacks that end in an explosion or a quick follow-up after trail, meaning that your dodge has to be precise.
That is one thing. The grabs in these games are very, very annoying. Like, I think pretty universally, they're pretty annoying. Especially when you have such a heavy emphasis on dodging. Especially when you have such an emphasis on dodging and the hitbox is too big, you know, or it's misplaced. You know, like the mimics in Dark Souls 2 are actually a really good example of that because, you know, if a mimic catches me in a grab, where do you think I should be? In front of them? Right in front of where their mouth is? Yeah, that's fair. Behind them? That's total bullshit. You know, and I'm not picking on Dark Souls 2 specifically for that. I'm just saying that like a good grab needs to make sense and not be overlapping with some point where they should not be able to grab you from. Like that clip he showed of Estelle, right?
Attacks that end in an instead of their arms or a weapon. Please stop making these from.
Like, see, like he dodged where the attack would be realistically within the like pinchers, and then he got pulled into that position. You know, it's like that is a very, you know, like that's a very bullshit sort of hitbox for detecting when the grab has like effectively happened, right? Like the hitbox should be where the pinchers are or where the mouth, like next to the pinchers is, not behind the head after you dodged it. Counterpoint on Nito, blocking with while two-handing sometimes will make that spike miss. Oh, really? I've never tried that. Again, this is part of the fun of the games. Different people try different things and find different solutions.
Attacks that end in an explosion or a quick follow-up after trail, meaning that your dodge has to be precisely timed to avoid both stages of the attack, or you need to dodge immediately again afterward. And while this list isn't exactly exhaustive, lastly, we have a long assortment of very flashy moves involving charging at weapons and jumping in the air and the like, which are focusing on being visually impressive. This is the type Dark Souls 3 went hard into with teleports, spell effects, long jumps, and so on, all to dazzle you into thinking it's a different type of attack, which works for the most part, I think.
This is one thing that I would kind of agree on him with that point is like, I think part of the reason why a lot of these interesting attacks in Dark Souls 3 sort of work the way they do is because they maintain the mechanical purpose of wind up, follow through, hit. You know what I mean? Or that 3-stage system that I talked about earlier, where there's the wind up, the follow up, and then the actual attack coming in. And I'd actually go back to see. Let's go back to.
This is the type Dark Souls 3 went hard into with teleports, spell effects.
Yeah, like this fight with the Dragon Slayer armor, when he does that long drag across the ground, like here's the wind
long
up.
Jumps, and
Actually, let me turn his audio off for this just so I can explain it. All right, so all right, here we go. So that's the wind up, right? That's the wind up of him smashing it into the ground. Here's the follow up, and then the attack, right? And that can vary depending on where the player is, right? So little things like that follow the same system; they're just a little faster. You know, it's a really, and that's part of the problem with Elden Ring is they've cut the middle part out. You know, they've cut the telegraphing in the middle out and just gone for wind up, damage dealt. You know, which is cheap, in my opinion. Gale remains the best DLC boss they've ever made, in my opinion. It always misses. Cool. Mesmer came close, but he still had some of that Elden Ring eye rolling bullshit. I mean, like, that's a good question, actually. What was my favorite DLC boss of all of these games? I mean, Gale's definitely up there. Artorias is definitely up there, too. I'd say Calamete's up there for me as well. I really like the Calamete fight. In terms of a DLC fight, I don't know which one I would pick. I did, and you remember this, Sheep, because you were there when it happened. When I beat Mesmer, he was the first boss that really impressed me, like in the DLC of Elden Ring, and that was I forget which part it was, like part 3 or something, but that was the first boss that I beat, and I was like, oh, that was actually really cool, right? It didn't feel like it was bullshit, right? There were some combos that got kind of annoying, but like it's one of those things where like overall, not bad, not bad. He was very aggressive, but had his openings, he had his combos, but they were telegraphed. There wasn't a whole bunch of AOE spam. And it was a pretty good fight. I don't know if I'd put him up there. I need to fight him with different builds to see how I feel about that. Like I've fought against Artorias, Calamite, and Gale with a lot of different builds, and with Mesmer, I've only beaten him twice with like 2 different builds. Well, I've beaten him 3 times technically, but I've only beaten him with 2 types of builds, right? So like a glass cannon and a tank. I need to see how he does against like spells and other shit, but that's something else. Lud and Zalin? No, no. Don't bring those up ever again. Mine's Artorias. Yep, Artorias is a favorite for a reason. Like he's a really good fight. Was Mesmer mesmerizing? Yes. Oh. Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with Mesmer. They contained themselves well enough with him, and that was such a breath of fresh air. It was. Mesmer was mesmerizing. Love a good one. That is a good one. But yeah, I mean, like I think part of the thing too is just Mesmer was a big part of the marketing for the DLC, so they kind of had to make him good. Because if you had like the marketed boss for the DLC suck, like that'd be bad. But I mean, also doesn't help that there are a lot of other problems in the game with the bosses besides Mesmer, so that's its own issue. But we'll see how it goes. Anyway, let's get back to this video.
Thinking it's a different type of attack, which works for the most part, I think. Back in 2015, I said in my very first video on Dark Souls 1 that the combat in that game is deeply engaging and complex enough to feel rewarding. I still stand by that statement, but playing more games like this as they've come out has made me realize I didn't understand what I was truly enjoying in that game. The moveset on the player is quite limited, and it was the game's enemy and encounter variety that I was appreciating more in terms of depth. In terms of game feel, however, Dark Souls 1 is still excellent. From has done it better since, but it's easy to forget that the grounded melee combat with the cool stamina system in that game was unusual because it felt good. Most melee combat before that didn't, and many games still don't feel as good today. Playing Bloodborne and Neo...
It's a very vague way to explain it, but it's very weird. And then there's Senesax. Oh fuck! Is that one dragon on the way to Bale that's like in the water and does absurd lightning damage in like every direction? Is that the one I'm thinking of? It just, man, I got PTSD flashbacks from fighting that fucker. It's so annoying, especially when you have to like, there's like no grace anywhere. That's the exact one. Yeah. She's very Senesaxonal. Get it? Sensational. I'd just say she's a bitch. But yeah.
Made me understand that Dark Souls 1's success was mostly in its complexity on the enemy side. The problem that stems from this then, as can be seen in the types of attacks we just went through, is that this is quite a limited source for that complexity to continue with fresh variety over the course of many games in a whole new series. And so, quite naturally, FromSoft entered an arms race against itself. A literal arms race, really, because it's mostly been about how fast they can make the arms move for these enemy attacks. Dark Souls 1 and 2 allow you to dodge roll, block, and physically move out of the way of some effects. That's all you can do, and in general, players who choose to block won't be doing much dodging, and those who typically choose to dodge won't be doing any blocking, period. This lack of response variety isn't exactly fertile ground for creating varied enemy encounters, but the gameplay was fresh enough that it worked for Dark Souls 1. In the sequel, we're already seeing some issues, although that's far from the only problem in Dark Souls 2, but let's leave the poor kid alone, it's suffered enough. Bloodborne is interesting because it commits to just one reaction, dodging. Because of that and the addition of the regain system, fights were much faster and more aggressive. Dodging now took less stamina and had less commitment, allowing you to attack faster and more often. The game also doubled down on offensive options, with trick weapons having two modes, with most providing large sweeps or the capability to zone enemies away from you. And equipment's weight is now irrelevant, so you can move more freely than ever. So instead of blocking or rolling, you were dash stepping, weaving hits, healing quickly, and controlling how close enemies could get to you with sweeping attacks. Knowing that every player had most of the power in this kind of loadout, unless they were specifically bucking the system for added challenge, meant that encounters could be comfortably designed with it in mind. Parrying is also always present as a more risk-reward version of countering some attacks instead of dodging them. And it works. Bloodborne is fantastic. Dark Souls 3 was a return to more build variety, but the influence of Bloodborne never went away. Some players like to say that Dark Souls 3 has Bloodborne bosses, but with a Dark Souls moveset for the player. There is some truth to this, but if you agree with that wholeheartedly, I encourage you to go back and play Dark Souls 1 for a bit, and then jump over to Dark Souls 3 right after. I think you'll be surprised how much faster you can move and how much better it is to dodge roll and how much better movement feels in general. Enemies have been powered up in Dark Souls 3, but so have you. Even saying that, by the end of the game, you are being pressed up against the weight of From's design limitations with a system that is either roll or block for defense again. The game receives some love with weapon arts, sort of like another trick weapon system for alternative movesets, which increases offensive options. But these are quite varied and hard to balance around, so on the reaction side of things, we're still at the Dark Souls 1 level. I don't want to come across as hating on Dark Souls 3 here because I like it a lot and think it particularly has a great spread of boss fights if you include the DLC. Despite the harsh limitations on what kind of responses they could build encounters around, they did a pretty good job while maintaining a high level of spectacle, mostly fair difficulty, and two fights against duos which...
I like how he picked on Solo Cinder there, even though you can totally run away from that attack and not get hit by it. But yeah, I will agree on this thing. It's like the thing about Dark Souls like 3 and Dark Souls 3, 2, Bloodborne, and stuff like that is, and Dark Souls 1, is that they're all sort of building off of that basic sort of Demon Souls-esque type of combat where, you know, you either block or dodge to sort of negate damage while dealing damage appropriately while balancing your stamina usage, right? And I think this is a thing that made Sekiro interesting by comparison, because dodging in... like, before Sekiro, dodging in a Souls game was very simple, right? You hit a button and you dodge. Like, there's the one type of dodge, right? You know, and no matter how they packaged it, it was the same thing mechanically, right? Like, when you dodge in a Souls game, you dodge in a direction, right? That's pretty much it. By the time Sekiro came around, even from the little bit I've played, the dodging is very different now, because now you dodge in particular directions, not just horizontally, but vertically as well, which impacts it, right? There's not as much reliance on iframes as in picking the correct dodge to use at the right time, right? And that's, I think, where Sekiro did a good thing, where it kind of expanded the idea of dodging, as opposed to just having the button that is the dodge button. You now have the jump dodge button. You now have the, you know, the crouch dodge button. You now have the dash to the side dodge button, right? You have different dodges for different attacks, because those attacks will be fighting you in different ways, and you need to pick a dodge that is appropriate. And I think that was a good expansion of the previous dodge system in mind. I think the problem with Elden Ring is that they try to mesh the old system with this Sekiro system, and I think it creates an overcomplicated thing of, I can try dodging through an attack, but I can't tell if I'm just mistiming the dodge or if I'm supposed to dodge it a different way. And that kind of confusion is something I went through when playing Elden Ring, where I assumed several attacks were dodgeable through like the classic way, when the best dodge option is to jump, right? Or the best option is to duck, right? And that's something that, fucks with the system because you have a consistent dodge mechanic in the traditional Souls role in Elden Ring, but you also have the jump and the crouch and the runaway stuff. And in Sekiro, if I remember correctly, they telegraph exactly which dodge option will be best. I think with the symbols that pop up. Let me know if I'm wrong. I only played the game for like 6 hours, so let me know if I get that wrong. But it's that kind of system, but without the telegraphing, and you're not sure exactly which one to use until after you die, right? Which I think is part of the problem, you know. But yeah, I do think it is a thing where Sekiro sort of expanded on things, and then Elden Ring didn't really know how to gel with that system on top of the old one. Which again, it comes back to that. I think they need to reinvent the way they do combat. I think they need to reinvent it because it will get stale over time if it's just the same shit, but you dodge more or you attack more, or like you do the same shit but more isn't always good, but it isn't always bad either. So I think it depends on how they sort of justify it. But I do think that they need to sort of reinvent how they look at combat from like a mechanics perspective. Bloodborne is where FromSoft made the decision to lean into the action part rather than the RPG of the action RPG. Yeah, and shame on Bloodborne. I mean, I think Bloodborne did a lot of good things, but at the same time, it is sort of very narrow in terms of how the combat can work, whereas these games are a little bit more broad in terms of like how you deal with a threat. Like kind of like what Joseph Anderson said, it's like you primarily dodge in Bloodborne because the game wants you to be more aggressive. That's why they have the rally mechanic. That's why they don't have that many shields in the game, and that's why you can dodge so fast and attack so fast and heal so fast. They want you to play fast and aggressive in that game. It's very obvious they want you to do that. But in a game like Elden Ring, where there's like a tank build that's available, or like something where you can back off and charge an attack for doing, or not the charge thing, but like, you know what I mean, right? There's a build where you don't play aggressively in the Souls games and in Elden Ring, right? And that they have to account for that system, when playing. Because it doesn't really make sense to have engender passivity. Yeah, it's that kind of thing. We're just Bloodborne's much more pro aggression, whereas these games are a little bit more varied and complicated, and because of that complication, they have to account for it, which can lead to problems.
Are the pinnacle of the series, Double Demons and Sister Phase 2. Learning how to roll and punish these attack patterns is an enjoyable time, and remember, blocking has that same kind of learning process too, since you need to learn when you can safely release your guard state to regain stamina between hits. Nameless King especially stands out as a fight that isn't crushingly challenging to me anymore, but isn't too easy either, all the while having entirely fair combos and a mix of sight-readable and delayed attacks. Looks cool too.
I mean, I'd agree with all that about Nameless King. He's one of my favorite fights at Dark Souls 3, and I think he's incredibly fair.
That's the progression we've had from Demon Souls.
And I'm not being sarcastic either. Like, I really do love this fight. I think it's really well made.
Readable and delayed attacks. Looks cool too. That's the progression we've had from Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, and Bloodborne. But then my boy Sekiro shows up and ruins everything.
This will only take a moment.
On the offense side, you only have one weapon, but that moveset has a whole tree of different weapon arts to learn. Charge moves that you can use out of dodging and running, and the shinobi prosthetic options that you always have available as complementary moves, which many bosses have specific weaknesses to that you can learn and exploit if necessary, kind of like spells in the previous games. This is still weaker compared to the variety of different builds in the other games, but the true masterstroke of Sekiro's combat is that the defensive play is also part of your offensive capabilities. In a fight, you will be asked not to just dodge or block, but both, and getting better at timing each of these means you deal more damage to the boss. You will also be tested on the directions of your dodges for counterattacking and responding to forward thrusts, and many fights.
And this is one thing, right, that I've seen in a lot of videos of Sekiro. Like, the combat has a really nice flow to it compared to sort of the Souls sort of formula, right? And even from playing the game a little bit, when the combat works, it works really well. And that flow is really smooth between like counterattacking, attacking, defending, and all that other stuff. Whereas in the Souls games, it tends to be kind of like one or the other, where it's like now I'm attacking, now I'm dodging. The line between those moves is blended in Sekiro, which is one of the reasons I want to play it, because that kind of flow just looks cool. And also just mechanically looks cool from like a way of playing it. And from the little bit I have played, when I get the combat and when it works, it's a lot of fun and it's really engaging. You know, and I that's one reason why I want to play the game is I want to get good with this system because it looks like a cool system.
Fights also ask for you to do jumping responses and the occasional grapple move. Compare this all to Dark Souls, where when a dragon fight asks me to run around the breath attack to hit its head instead of just some more dodge rolls, and I think, wow, feeling spicy tonight, huh, From Software? And unironically enjoy the switch up. I think the improvement is clear. However, this keeps going. 9 times out of 10, you are also rewarded for aggressive play. Attacking the boss instead of staying in neutral, either to deal damage or force them to deflect you and interrupt their move, is not just entirely valid, it's sometimes the best play. Dodging and then attacking is also better early in fights to get enemy health down, so their posture bar damage builds up faster, so you're not always in the same mode and doing the same thing. Remember that Sekiro doesn't have stamina in a traditional sense, so you can do all of these moves and even run around as much as you like, and it's only when your posture bar is nearing full that you need to slow down and hold the guard state to recover it. This means it's easy to sprint around lots of attacks that enemies have, but you won't want to because of the most important change Sekiro brings to the table. Dealing with enemy attacks head-on is a way of dealing damage to them. If you deflect every attack in an enemy combo, then you are filling up their posture bar and are inching closer to exposing them for a death blow. There is a huge difference in the type of playstyle you can start with if you want to play cautiously while learning, and then confidently as you're approaching mastery. The result is entering a flow state of gameplay that's up there with the likes of the best platformers like Celeste in the Mario games and Doom Eternal's combat for how enjoyable it is, which is easily my favorite first-person shooter of all time for exactly this kind of play. You can always either be in a hyper-aggressive state or a Neo one with the Matrix responsive state while fighting, and at the best moments you will be flipping between them seamlessly. In Dark Souls, you can find yourself approaching combos in a memorization game of, when the boss does X move, I need to dodge instantly, then delay dodge, then dodge instantly again, then 2 delay dodges, and then I can attack. And while you certainly can play Sekiro like that too for memorizing attack patterns, you can also just respond to everything that's coming at you on the fly, and feel like you're dueling instead of acting as an algorithm that knows the perfect way to deal with each attack as the boss queues them up. Sekiro isn't perfect about this. I have criticism for that game too, and an unreleased video that's been lost to the Witcher hell, but it is far better about making its boss fights fun ordeals in both how you can enter this flow state of play and for it being balanced around carefully measured increases in power from attack and health upgrades in a semi-linear world. So why has all this done damage to Elden Ring? Well, many of the final fights in the game feel like Sekiro fights without understanding why Sekiro fights work so well, and without updating the player tools enough to reasonably deal with them. It's like the Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne thing all over again, although this time, it's really, really applicable. If a boss can enter incredibly long combo chains before you get a chance to hit them, then it's important to make dealing with those combos a worthwhile experience and a fun experience. As we just went over, in Sekiro that works because every time a boss attacks you in that game, it's an opportunity to reverse the damage dealt back at them. In Elden Ring, if you dodge an attack, it just means you don't take damage, and also costs you stamina. So the longer the chains get between chances to counterattack, the more it makes sense to just stay away from the boss while it's doing them and hit them at the end.
Yeah, and that's my biggest, that's probably the best point he's made in this video, is just like the delayed shit just wastes your time and your stamina. And damn, I want to play Sekiro now. But yeah, I mean, like, I totally agree with what he just said there. It's like, it's, you know, like when you make these combos, like the way the dodging works in this, like the dodging does not affect your aggression. It affects, or not directly, it doesn't affect how aggressive you can be. It just means that you avoided damage for the moment, but it can be followed up by a combo or an AoE move or a grab or whatever, right? So, you know, that's one thing that I think makes Sekiro really interesting. Like just looking at it, not even like beating it, but like looking at it from a different perspective, is that like Sekiro has a very different flow where it's all about the flow. And it kind of reminds me of Assassin's Creed combat in a way, because it's got that sort of flowing nature of, you know, I'm attacking, doing my thing, but then you attack and I counter, and then I do extra damage to you, or I guess stance damage in that game. But, you know, it's that kind of thing where that flow makes it feel like a real combat encounter, and gets you into the rhythm of it, whereas these games tend to be, okay, the big combo's coming, I need to fuck off for a little bit so I don't waste all my stamina. And that's part of the reason why I think I really want to try Sekiro after beating Elden Ring several times, is because I'm tired of the way Elden Ring fights. I want to see how Sekiro fights, and I want to try to get good at how Sekiro fights. I appreciate some Sekiro glazing as much as the next guy, but come on, let's go. Never thought I'd hear you saying you really want to play Sekiro after your previous comments on it. So excited. Well, I mean, like, it's a thing where, like, I have a hard time understanding it because the controls are fucked and because I'm not used to the symbols, right? It's one of those, it's the biggest difficulty curve from what I've heard of all of the From games. And it was just so hard that I didn't really know how to handle it. And I would like to figure it out, right? And I think the Elden Ring DLC maybe want to go back and play Sekiro just to see the game that came out before this. Because having beaten Melania several times by this point, I want to see where that sort of influence in like, why is the comparison made between her and Sekiro, right? I kind of want to understand that. Yeah, from what I've heard, a lot of people struggle with Sekiro's difficulty, and it's harder for me because my controls don't match what I actually play with. So that creates its own issues. But I'm going to do that on stream, and I will try to figure it out and do things properly. We'll see how it goes.
Here's an enemy type that shows this beautifully because Sekiro has one just like it. In that game, this is an initially daunting but then surprisingly easy test for you to chain deflections and then counter. In Elden Ring, you just stay away and watch until it's done, and hopefully get a punish if it's done, maybe? If this was a one-off, then I'd be happy about it because it looks cool and is kind of funny, but this spills over so hard into the boss design philosophy that I'm wondering what the hell happened to the team that designed Sekiro. How could a group that understood what makes a good combat system so well there not see the issues with Elden Ring? If a boss attacks 100 times in a row, and you're expected to dodge every swing, and only then, after all 100, get a chance to hit them, then I think we can all agree that's a problem. So
I've made a similar example where if you have a boss that does like 100-point combo and it takes 5 minutes to wind up, like, that's just tedious. Who'd have thunk it that I'd agree with old Joe on something?
All 100 get a chance to hit them, then I think we can all agree that's a problem. So how low does that number have to be before it's now a reasonable challenge? Because some of these bosses often enter states in this game of not being able to be safely attacked for well over 20 seconds. And in the case of the last boss jumping around so much, we can measure it in literal minutes. If the game wants long combos like this, then it needs a system that deals damage to the boss in some way as an incentive for me to risk dealing with it all head on. Especially so if the act of rolling it all means it's actually hurting my damage potential if I'm out of stamina by the end, which actually happened to me with an investment of over 40 endurance when it came to responding to some of these long attack chains. If iframing through an attack meant the boss took stagger damage or something, then now we're cooking. But I also realize at this point I am literally just describing Sekiro. Not only do the last set of bosses in this game attack for so long that it makes my videos look short, they also don't have clear and consistent punish windows afterward. Going back to Dark Souls 3, I was shocked to see how often I could safely be aggressive from neutral on bosses and between many of their combo swings, even with a big slow-ass weapon that you can see on the screen right now. Bosses in Elden Ring will do anime acrobatics for a whole episode, including chains that involve them taking off into the air, landing into an attack that explodes, and then taking off again into the air because they're still not done, like a plane coming into the runway and taking off again when they realize their landing gear is broken. Look, there are tons of other problems like this in the game that could be fixed, along with some grab boxes and hitboxes and all that usual shit, but the fundamental issue here is this. It is too often a dice roll guessing game of whether or not I can safely attack these bosses as a melee build. The first problem is that many of these long combos don't indicate clearly enough that they're done, either because they go on for much longer than you think, or combos can now bleed from one to another without much warning and you're just meant to watch, I guess. This is not only fine but great in Sekiro because it adds to the flow state you can enter between you and the boss, but in Elden Ring you don't have those tools. My second part of this problem is my biggest issue with the game, period, which is that some bosses have optional extensions on combos that they sometimes only do if you attack them.
I'd say they also have combo extensions if you heal as well. And that's the thing, is like they have combos that they have, and then they have additions based on what your input is, which I think is a really cheap way to make them harder. Where they have specific moves that they add at the end to catch you out when you're damaging them. Or if you back off and try to heal, they will spin around and do some grab move, or they will just poke you with something. It's really, really annoying. That glitch for Phase 1 Millennia still hasn't been patched. I know, I've dealt with it. It's really annoying. Like, I don't get why that is. I feel like they just messed up the coding and haven't fixed it.
Picture this. You've worked out which attacks are punishable on a boss, and you're finally feeling confident about taking them down. You've hit the boss after a specific combo ends a few times now, and that's the one you're sinking your sword into while you're learning how to exploit the rest of them. It's the 6th time in the fight that you've successfully dodged a string, you position yourself to attack, and then as you hit the button, the boss reads your gamepad input and then randomly decides that this time their combo isn't over, and leaps into the air to punish your attempt to punish them. Do you know what this means as a player, FromSoft? This means... How angry did I sound there? I'm sorry. This means the attack is no longer safely punishable. This means that whenever the boss does this combo, you either have to hope they also do the extension on their own so you can punish that, or you just watch impotently if they don't, because if you had attacked them, there was a risk that they would have done damage to you instead. I haven't even gotten to the bullshit that is the unavoidable hits yet, and I'm already furious with these bosses. This
is one thing where, like, I get where he's coming from with this, right? It is it's one of those things where it's really kind of evident that the bosses have moves that are built to catch you out when you think, like, the developers know when you think the combo will be over because you've seen the combo end at that point, but then they stitch something on at the end to fuck you over, which is very annoying. But this is one thing where he's about to talk about the unavoidable hits. And I have to say that, like, I've dodged, I think, pretty much every attack in the game at least once without taking damage. So I don't think that, and obviously there are no hit runs, obviously, that other much better players have done. So these are dodgeable, but I understand the sort of extremity in which they can hit you, where it's just really, really, really just not good when you have a huge, like, AoE move, that still tags you even if you're not actually in the area, or if you're, like, if the dodge requires a, like, 0.03 second reaction time. Is that the riposte don't kill her glitch? Pretty much. I've also found it where I've gotten her health down by just smacking her normally, and then I've had to hit her an extra time. So I think it's just an inconsistent glitch where I feel like what the glitch is in the code, and again, I'm not a coder, so take everything I say here with a grain of salt. I think probably the glitch is that she's programmed to get down to 1 HP, and then you have to hit her one more time to bring that HP down, I think is what the issue is, like, in the actual mechanics of her transitioning from phase 1 to 2. But again, I'm not a coder, so, but it looks like that to me. Fun fact, that's a patch to a different glitch. I've seen her survive with no HP, been hit afterwards, then a third time, and she still isn't dead. It's really inconsistent. Like, I've had it happen where I'd riposte her, hit her once, and it works. Then I'd, like, just beat her down normally, and she'd continue to take damage. I've also seen her go down, like, and then get, like, a hit through, and then, like getting a hit. Like, I hit her, got her down to 1 HP. She hit me, got however much health back. Then I hit her again, back down to 1. And then I had to hit her again to go back. It's just confusing. It's just really confusing. But anyway, let's get into what he's about to say with these unavoidable hits.
So much about this combat system's design that is based around forcing you to wait around while the boss has fun. And it's not even another person, it's an AI. I do not understand it. The end result is encouraging builds that can deal damage to the boss while staying away from them, or just hit trading. In Dark Souls 1 through 3, I could learn almost every pattern, and even though I'd still mess up now and then, I knew it was my mistake, and if I tried hard enough, I could actively engage the boss and deal damage without ever getting hit myself. In Sekiro, you can respond to everything while doing that damage. In Elden Ring, my patience is being tested to wait, and wait, and wait, and then hopefully the Witcher 3 video comes out and there isn't some secret extension to this combo I'm punishing that I don't know about. Hopefully the boss doesn't dice roll on resisting a stagger or randomly decide to dodge away from this hit, denying the opportunity I had to wait so long for. I know there is a way to do these fights hitless if you're patient enough, or build yourself to burst them down quickly, but like I said at the start of this section, that makes me feel like I'm playing the game wrong, because it's not about it being too hard, it's that it's not fun, it's boring. And I'm not trying to weasel out of saying it's not too hard. It is too hard, that is the problem, but it's that it's so hard in a way that makes it not fun. I would love this level of difficulty if it was engaging, but it's not, because it involves so much waiting.
I mean, and I've made that point too. It's just it takes so damn long to counteract like a boss's moveset. You know, especially when the moveset deals massive damage over a large area. It's like you basically are maximizing the amount of time the player has to fuck off in between attacking the boss. It just makes everything take longer. You know how some riposts have 2 hits? If you kill her with the first hit, phase 2 wouldn't have health. I've heard that. I've heard like different riposte issues have happened with Melania, but yeah, that's how I beat her the first time. Melania with no health in phase 2 seems like a reward. Yeah, that is. Yeah, but I've seen different glitches with her and other bosses where the riposte, like I've seen a lot of issues with phase transitions where special moves like ripostes and like status buildup can fuck with health bars where they either don't go through or they go through to an extreme degree. Like I've fought with like a bleed build against Godric, for example, where I'll get the bleed proc right before the cutscene plays, and it'll take off like I don't know what percentage of his health, maybe like 20% of his health, right? And he'll be at like 40%. But when I load back in, he's back up to like 50 or 60% health. Like the damage I dealt is negated by the cutscene triggering, right? And it's one of those weird bug things that I don't know how they can fix it, because the game's been patched to hell and this shit's still in there. So I don't know what the fuck the problem is at this point. But yeah, what he's talking about here is totally legit a problem. It is frustrating when a boss runs away from you, B has an extended combo that you know you are better off to run away from, and C does ridiculous damage with the attacks when they do one or both of those things, right? It's just there's so much running around not fighting the boss. Like you're just running away from it half the time. And that's part of the annoying part of these games.
What about these other issues?
Or not of these games, but of this game in particular. So there's so much running away. There's so much backing off, waiting for your opening, and then you get your opening. Like you spend more time backing off than you do punishing, and that fucks with the flow.
I keep talking about then. For some of you, these will be worse than what I just went into above, but while they are annoying to me, they pale in comparison to the complete erosion of predictable and preventable from this series, in what frankly feels like an unintended side effect of trying to make the game hard to keep up the series' reputation for being difficult, rather than for compelling gameplay. The jump button. It's a good addition for exploration, not so much for combat. Jumping attacks are powerful and pushed on you as a reliable way to stagger enemies, but there's no stagger bar, and I suspect that during some moves, bosses take 0 stagger damage, so it's a complete shot in the dark for how you can learn to stagger these enemies.
Man, if I imagine fighting Riker like that, holy shit, that's gotta suck. Damn.
Jumping attacks are also a godsend for slow, heavy weapon users because they normalize attack times but have such long recoveries that you're once again incentivized into trading. If the boss has such a high chance of hitting you anyway when you hit them, then you may as well do it on your own terms. Hell, it'll even end the fight faster. Worse still is the lack of the communication about which attacks you can jump over. This should be a celebrated inclusion in the defensive options of the series and brings it closer to parity with Sekiro. Instead, there are no symbols telling you that some moves can be jumped, and you just have to figure it out. Which would be fine, except there's little rhyme or reason to what you can jump. You'd think that all ground-based attacks and low sweeps would be jumpable, but they aren't, at least not always. You'd think attacks that come at you so high they're between your nipples and shoulders wouldn't be jumpable, but some of them are, and so from a lack of human...
Going back to some of those clips of the last 2 fights, this thing, like this attack that Radigan's doing,
and you just
this Radigan hit that we're about to see, like he jumps like before it, like significantly before it reaches him, and then this time he's jumping later, and so he gets tagged by it. You can jump that, but the timing is really tight. So there is a problem there, but it's not the way he's not he's not showing evidence that explains it the best way possible. But he is right. There are problems with these big moves in terms of like how you're supposed to dodge them.
Ways. You'd think attacks that come at you so high they're between your nipples and shoulders wouldn't be jumpable, but some of them are. And so from a lack of communication and piss poor consistency, what should have been my favorite addition to combat is a disappointment. Unavoidable attacks. These come in 3 types that are equally troublesome. The first are directly unavoidable. Mog, Lord of Blood, has a phase change that hits you with 3 highly damaging, entirely unavoidable blasts that also heal him. If you're lucky enough to find the wondrous Physic Flask thingy that allows you to resist this damage, then it does significantly less, but is still unavoidable damage. If the boss didn't also have a nigh unreactable Flaming Claw response that can punish slow weapon strikes, then I'd be on board with considering this a cool gimmick for the fight. The last boss,
Yeah, I think Moog is probably the most bullshit of the bosses in terms of just the good versus the bad. Like the bad significantly outweighs the good in the Moog fight just because he sprays flaming blood puddles everywhere that build up bleed on top of having combo like counters, or not combo counters, but combo extensions that catch you out if you heal or run away, on top of the blood ritual thingy that he does where he builds that up, with the only negation being that one particular physic thing, right? Like Moog has a lot of bullshit. And it's like his moveset isn't even that bad. His melee moveset isn't even like terrible. It's just everything on top of it's just really just annoying. It's also kind of funny that he's not that resistant to bleed. Like I've bled him to death before, and it's like not actually that hard to do. Bleed is like very overpowered in this game. You know, even against like the blood boss, which I think is kind of funny. Bro, Joseph, why are you using a regular weapon for Rykard? Yeah, that's my question. Is like if you're by the time you hit Rykard, you should have like at least like a better weapon or like an upgraded thing. You're still using like a regular sword. I don't think this move is that bad with the tier, but it does set a precedent where we're reaching unavoidable Omega move territory. Yeah. You cannot no-hit this boss. It's impossible. Arcane builds are my favorite. The dragon spells and the weapons are awesome. Yeah, arcane builds are very fun. But like, yeah, I think there is a way to dodge, not dodge, but I think you can no-hit beat the games, but you can't no-hit every single enemy in the games. And I think Moog's probably the best example of that. But I think I've seen somewhere where you can negate the damage, so it would technically count as a no-hit run. I don't know if it's like a physic thing or if it's some. Now you can beat Moog before that charges up, right? Like there are crazy builds out there that can do absurd damage to kill him before you get to that point. So it is possible. You know, it's just really extreme, you know. Probably doesn't like boss gimmick weapons. I mean, even if you don't use boss weapons, there are still plenty of weapons out there that have like better usage than just the basic sword, like one of the basic sword. Longsword is his favorite weapon, I think. Well, that explains some. I mean, you can beat every Souls game with any weapon in the game, technically, so I guess it comes down to just how OP you want to be. That's fair, but why suffer with this guy? That takes a stubbornness I can't fathom. Yeah. That's a recurring theme I've seen with Joseph over the years from different people covering him, is he can be very stubborn. I didn't even think about that. You can no-hit the boss if you just kill him before phase 2. Yeah. Well, that's one thing about having like phase 2 transitions that are cutscene related or stagger related, or you know, like how those trigger, right? Like crazy builds can do crazy things to just negate boss fights in general. But anyway, let's keep going.
Elden Beast can summon a homing orb that I've shown a few times in the video by now that I believe can only be avoided if you are rocking the Bloodhound step weapon art. If you don't, then you're going to be taking a chaotic amount of light show damage that can also overlap with other attacks the beast can use. I can't believe this fight made it into the final release of the game. It's so awful. The second...
Nah, I'm going to push back on that. The Elden Beast fight is not awful. It's just tedious, right? And I think that's the biggest thing about it. Like, a lot of the Elden Beast moves are very easy to dodge, right? They're very easy to dodge. Some of the harder ones, like the ring thing that he mentioned earlier that he didn't know he could jump through, like that's not difficult to dodge. It's not easy, but it's not difficult to dodge either, right? And I'd say probably the most dangerous move is probably that move he just did with the sparkling light following you around. That's probably the most damaging move consistently, and I think it's just a thing where, Joe's particularly mad at the Elden Beast because of that one move. When you look at the whole move set of it, it's not that hard. It's just very tedious because it runs away from you half the time, which can be annoying, but the fight itself isn't actually that bad. Reminds me of watching people try to kill Yorm without Storm Ruler or Vendrick without Giant Souls. Yeah, it's that kind of tedium. Yeah, that's how I beat him normally. Yeah, it's just same because I have an arcane build and I usually just use bleed curved swords. Yeah, I mean, just there's a lot of. It's one of those weird things where when you think about what's the best way to show bosses transitioning from phases. Are cutscenes better because you force the player to go through them and reset everything, or is it better to have the boss transition while the player can still do shit while they're transitioning to phase 2? You know what I mean? I think there's an argument for both sides in terms of which is fair and which is more open-ended for player choice. But let's keep going. He's still got a lot to say about. I think this is the last point he's making, and he's going on a really long rant about it. So we'll see how much he talks about.
Type are moves that you can avoid under some conditions, but they then dictate how you can interact with the boss. These are the most insidious to me and were one of the top sources of boredom and frustration I had with the game. Here are 3 examples, but these aren't the only ones. Godric may be my favorite fight, but he has a whirlwind move he starts so quickly that the only way you could possibly hope to avoid it is if you hit dodge roll the instant you ever see his model move, and even then, you still may not be quick enough.
I mean, you can dodge it. I mean, it really just depends on. It really depends on what you're doing after, in between combos at that point. If you're hitting him with a really heavy weapon, doing the heaviest attack possible, you're not going to have time to get away. But if you're doing quick little slashes with something, or even a medium-sized weapon, just a quick little roll hit, you can back away from that. Now the windup is really quick before the wind actually comes around, but it is dodgeable. And I think some of his complaints are going to be sort of negated by the fact that you can dodge them. It just kind of depends on what you're doing beforehand. Right? If you're recovering from a huge hit with a weapon, then you're probably not going to have time to dodge. Soul of Cinder is a good example of transition during fight. Yeah, I'd say it is. Because you beat the health bar down, then he comes back, which gives you time to recover, but also can damage you if you're not paying attention. And I think it's a thing where, that's a pretty good transition. I'd say that's actually a really good transition, all things considered, because you don't get distracted by a cutscene. You have time to recover in between, and the boss transitions, without running into any glitches. Because as far as I know, I've never seen any Soul of Cinder's glitch involving the phase transition.
This is below 20 frames of animation from start to damage, and that's my criteria for something being unreactable. Anything a few frames above that would still be a demanding challenge of your reaction speed, but possible. Remember that this isn't like a click test reaction that you can find online. You also have to know the appropriate response from the tell, which takes up more of your reaction bandwidth, so to speak. The existence of this move means you can never stay in melee range with Godric while he's in neutral, so as soon as you punish one of his...
Yeah, you saw it, watch this wind up, right? I'm going to slow this down. All right, let's watch this. All right, so he does his jump. He comes down. All right, Joe has a chance to hit him. He slaps him. All right, there the animation starts, right? He is able to move for a little bit of time. And this is the thing, right? You are able to see the wind up to the move while he's moving, right? So you have control of your character while the wind up is happening. Let me back it up again. All right, so I don't know the exact frame that it starts, but that's that attack ending. That's his attack. All right, now he's starting to do that wind up right here-ish, right? So he has about 1 second to react to that. That's enough time to back off, right? All right, so begins a little after 42. The hit comes right at about 43. So, like, there is enough time to dodge that. It's just a matter of timing, right? And knowing that he will typically do that move several times throughout the fight, right? And this is one thing, too, is like, I think going into this game, you have to be aware of, like, going into this game after the previous games, there are going to be a lot of moments where the bosses will just react to whatever you're doing as fast as possible, which can sometimes lead to death, but sometimes it is a fair telegraphing. It's just that the boss and the developers know that you're going to try to punish now. So they're going to pull out a move that you can dodge, but most players probably aren't going to be dodging. They're going to be attacking, right? This move isn't that heinous. Godric is balanced, so if you can't react to it, you can tank it. You're fine, man. I mean, it is dodgeable, but it does showcase the problem of having massive AoE moves that a boss can do when you're in melee range. You know, might help if I turn the audio back on.
Moves, get the hell away from him, and joust his next one, which once again encourages you staying away from enemies during combos and not dealing with their movesets head on. I still love this boss because he looks so cool though, and his gap closers were fun for me to react to. In general, this game is actually pretty great for the visual variety of bosses, it's just the mechanics that let them down.
Yeah,
Elden Ring might be the best.
I'd agree with that too. A lot of things look pretty, but mechanically they get really tedious. Yeah, I hate that bosses can do AoEs no matter your positioning. Yeah, we'll just say it's a really cheap way to damage the player too, because it's not like an AoE move that is done in like a cone effect, right? Like the Godfrey's moves, right, where he does that little like foot slam in that little like triangle in front of him. You can dodge by jumping or rolling away from it. You can roll away from it if you get far enough like through it. You know. Oh, here we go. Hello, Fire Giant, you obnoxious, terribly designed boss. I think Fire Giant is definitely one of the worst bosses in the game. He is an absolute shit. Just an absolute dung pile.
Great for the visual variety of bosses, it's just the mechanics that let them down. Elden Ring might be the best for that, actually, for visual variety. It's better than Sekiro for sure. Maybe Dark Souls 1 is up there. Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3. Yeah, I would give it to Elden Ring for sure. This has been another off-script moment. I hope you like them. Godskin Noble has a similar attack in which he can do a belly flop explosion. This one is even harder to roll because it projects an AoE. By sheer luck, I managed to be rolling once when he did it, and I still took damage, so this is, again, a move that forces you away from him if he's in a neutral state. Millennia, who is the...
About that thing, I think you can dodge into that belly flop attack, though. Like, I think you can dodge into it and won't take damage if you time it right, which, again, a lot of these attacks have that. Like, if you time it right, it's okay. But that attack is very annoying because he does it very fast. So you got to be, like, ready to do shit. I love awful the terrain is, too. Sometimes you legit can't hit his foot because it's hovering from the slightest inch over a ledge. Yeah, Fire Giant is just all around, I think, terrible. Way too much health, way too much fire damage, way too mobile for how big he is. And just the AoE moves he deals of just constantly shit exploding is just like shut the fuck up and die already, you stupid redheaded fuck. You know, no offense to redheads out there, but damn, Fire Giant makes people hate makes people hate redheads for no reason other than the fact that he's just terrible.
The Blade of Mikola, by the way, will go down in history in this series for her version of this problem if she's not patched, and even if she is, the infamy she's already garnered at this point may last forever. Waterfowl Blade is the most oppressive move From has ever put into one of these games, but even if we ignore how difficult it is to learn how to dodge, it defines the fight in a way that makes it boring. This is...
All right, he's laying out a lot of points of why I don't like waterfowls. Let's see what else he's got to say about it, which I agree with everything he just said about waterfowl. It is extremely difficult, very hard to dodge, and extremely tedious is what I think he's going to say next.
This is the most important part of why this move is troublesome. A good rule to follow if you want to avoid damage on this fight is this. If Millennia has not done this move in the past 20 seconds, you cannot be within 10 feet of her. If you are, then you are risking her starting this up and not having enough time to get away from her first set.
Now, this is one thing I've actually done on a recording recently is while fighting her, she did waterfowl within 10 seconds of previously starting a waterfowl, right? She can spam that shit. And that's fucking ridiculous. The fact that she can spam an ability that can heal half of her health bar, legitimately half of her health bar, if it lands. And if it doesn't fully land, you still got to dodge like 50 hits, right? You still got to dodge like a ridiculous amount of hits, right? And I've seen her do it where she will do waterfowl dance, do like 1 or 2 combos, and then waterfowl again within a very short span of time. I have that recording. It will appear in a video I'm working on. I am going to put that fucker in there. Yeah, she can do it back to back to back. You've seen it, I've seen it, we've all seen it. And of course, we die at the end. You know, it's typical. It's just typical From Software bullshit. The boss will pull out their most damaging, health replenishing, hard to dodge bullshit move. And again, this is one thing I've said is if they took waterfowl out or reduced the damage, I think this could have been the best boss they ever made. It's just waterfowl fucks this fight. It just tips it over the edge so hard. On top of the healing element of it, on top of the damage of it, on top of how hard it is to dodge, on top of how much damage it does, it's just an overpowered fucking move. And when you get her blade and do it, it's nowhere near as powerful. It should be as powerful as her fucking move. I don't care for balancing. If she can do a move that overpowered and you get her weapon and you can do it, you should be able to deal an absurd amount of damage with it, especially when it has a wind up. It's like, what the fuck? If they do it now, you know how many difficulty whores would cry because they want nonsense hard shit and not balanced hard shit? It's like, yeah. That's the thing. They've committed to Melania being as hard as she is, just the same way they've committed to Consort Radon being as hard as he is. They've committed to it, and now I'm walking away. So, good luck, From. Good luck.
You don't even need to be within striking distance to be too close, outside of some speed boost using like Bloodhound Step again. The first wave of this attack is outright unable to be rolled, and at the time of writing this, only has one speedrunner tier level manipulation trick in making her miss you, which is out of reach of practically all players. I don't want to show anyone else's footage in this video because of copyright concerns, but basically you run a circle around her as she's in the air for the first part, and at a specific point you dash away, and then she goes in the opposite direction and doesn't hit you for the first set. She can do this move after you know.
Now this is one thing too. What he just said there are different ways to dodge this move, but they are often very difficult, right? Because they usually involve you running, like actually not walking, not backing up, not walking away, running away from the boss for a duration of the combo and then dodging through the rest of it, or doing the reverse, where you dodge X, Y, or Z, and then you run away. And like it's a different combination of dodging and running away, which I don't have a problem with on principle, but they do it to the point where you have to dodge specific directions. If you don't have the right equip load, your dodge will get fucked up. And you have to run away because it's just, it's going to combo you if you don't roll. Like you have to roll very specific ways at very specific points in the combo, or run away at very specific points in very specific parts of the combo. Like it's dodging this attack is very overcomplicated compared to every other move in the game, right? It's a very difficult thing to dodge. Which, if it didn't do that much damage, that'd be one thing, but it does an absurd amount of damage and heals her and is hard to dodge. It's a 3-part punch to the balls, right? Just over and over and over. And it's just really annoying to deal with, especially when you feel like you're doing really well in the fight and then she fucks you with this move, right? Like this is the most fuck you move that they've designed out of a boss in Elden Ring. It just does absurd damage and you can be doing well against the boss. Then she brings out this move and you fail, right? This is the red light, green light move of bosses where it's like you are very close to beating her. She pulls this out, she can kill you. That's how fucking bad it gets. And we all know it because we've all fought her and dealt with it. And that's part of the problem. I can do it to varying degrees of success, but the fact that we need to do this shows me that this was not play tested to acceptable degrees. Yeah, I wonder if they play test it where one player, like if one player is able to dodge it effectively without taking damage, I feel like they pass it off after that. Like I don't know how their play testing is, but I don't believe it's very good anymore.
Knock her below 70% health or so, and she continues to be able to use it whenever she wants after this with a cool.
Now, this is one thing about this move too. She can be statused like status affected out of it, right? If you bleed her or frostbite her. So I have seen those work to stop her, but still, you have to time that shit really well. It's basically a move that's so absurd to deal with that, yes, bleed. But it's a move that has such a ridiculous counter to it that you're better off just to run away from her and just not fight her. Like, just period. Like, just don't even engage in the fight. Because, I mean, you really don't get anything out of fighting her that's worthwhile. Because, you know, her rune is not that great because it negates your, like, beating, the rewards for beating her are rewards that only crazy dedicated players would use anyway, right? Because her great rune restores health after taking damage like in Bloodborne, but reduces your flask health, your flask, not usage, your flask healing, which is already a stupid restriction, right? Why does this one great rune have a restriction like that? Like, why does it have a negative effect? What the fuck? You make the hardest fight in the game, give a rune that reduces our flasks while letting us gain health back by attacking. It's like, fuck you. You already made her hard as shit. Can I at least get a reward that doesn't negate something I'm probably going to use for the rest of my playthrough? It's just so many problems with it, with her. And she could have been fantastic, right? That's the biggest thing, right? This isn't like Fire Giant where it's just terrible through and through. There's a lot of good shit in the Melania fight. It's just this move fucks her over so badly in terms of difficulty. You know, and that's on top of the self-healing for every single time she hits you, even if you block it. It's just terrible, right? It's just a terribly imbalanced boss. That could have been fantastic.
Below 70% health or so, and she continues to be able to use it whenever she wants after this with a cooldown of what feels like 20 seconds. This means you cannot stay close to her, cannot hit her, and cannot punish any of her other moves if she has not done this recently without risking taking damage. It would actually be better if this move was on a timer instead of a cooldown, because then at least you could reliably play around it, because while she can do it, doesn't mean she will. She can go ages without using it. I've seen people kill this boss with an entire phase 2 where she doesn't do it once. And
yeah, this is one thing he's bringing up too. Like, when it shows up is a problem, because I've had that happen too, where she never does it and then she spams it the next time I fight her. It's really inconsistent.
Yet the potential for her being able to means you're playing into the risk by not waiting. This issue is so blatant that she can instantly rev up Waterfall Blade in response to being knocked down below 70% life, as you can see here. If you want to play this like a typical boss of learning how to avoid patterns and punish, then strap yourself in for a boring time, because it's not like every single one of her other moves is safely punishable either. That's why she's called Millennia, because it takes a millennia to be able to safely hit her. I think this goes to show you how much the game encourages trading. If you have the patience for this, then more power to you. I do not. After hitting so many bosses in a row with issues like this, I put on the biggest weapon I had and turned to the Grug. Because if I'm going to trade, it'll be on my terms and with dealing the most damage. I guess I lied about 3 examples for this one, because here's a bonus 4th one. Beast Clergyman has a similarly unreactable move in which he sweeps his weapon in a backwards motion from neutral. Like the others, the only hope you ever have of rolling this is to instinctively hit the button if the boss ever does any motion at all if you are close to him, and therefore, just like that, staying in melee range of this enemy is risking damage. The third and final type...
I would agree. Beast Clergyman really sucks and drags down the Malekith fight massively. Now, granted, that backward slash is I think, a part of a combo, right? So I think an argument can be made that you should see it coming after he does a couple of those quick swipes. Like, it's part of the combo, I think. But his combo does shift, like, depending on what you're doing. So that, again, it comes back to that issue of adjustable combos that you can't predict until they're over. And by the time you're sure they're over, they're starting the next combo.
Of unavoidable attack requires another return to Sekiro. This guy is Spearman Steve. He's a pretty fun enemy because he requires using the awesome-looking Makiri counter. He also has a quirk that is so odd, and I think unique in the game, that I don't know if it's a bug or not. Seen here, if you jump when you're close to Steve, then there's a random chance he will instantly thrust his spear into your face. And this attack comes so quickly that the perilous warning sound and symbol is like a joke. It is possible to deflect this if you just make deflecting a part of your jump. In fact, it's so reliable that you can kill him quite easily by baiting out this move, but most vitally for our discussion here, he doesn't always do it. And yet Steve will sometimes do it after you respond to his attack that requires you to jump. You can get the warning of a sweep, jump, and eat a spearhead to the face when Steve cancels out of his sweep halfway because you triggered his dice roll thrust on your shift to being in the air. This reminds me very much of the issues I had with Pontiff Sullivan in Dark Souls 3, where states and animations are being skipped or munched and it's unclear what's intended. From a gameplay perspective, I like that Steve can do this because I'm clearly biased for Sekiro because it's a dynamic way of mixing moves and responses. But the fact that the only way I can respond to this is just to assume he's going to do it and preemptively block, and if he doesn't do it, then I just wasted my jump opportunity, leaves me unsatisfied with how this works, even though I like it in theory. This links to the issue I have with optional extensions on combos that we just spoke about, but for an example specific to Elden Ring of this, we need look no further than Radagon, another visually stunning boss with a big problem that made me turn to the Grug.
I fought Beast Clergyman like half an hour ago, did not enjoy it. I just face tank him and play so damn well against Malekith. Yeah. Which is, it's a very... Like, I was fighting him, and I'm going to show this. I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring lately to work on a video for it. And I was playing a mage build with a really quick spell. I forget which one it is. I forget if it's Night Comet or just regular Comet. But one of those like sort of like mid-range sort of mage spells. And we got into a rhythm where he would do a combo. I would build up that spell and shoot it, and right as my spell left my hand, he would throw an attack at me. I'd be able to dodge it, and then that whole cycle would repeat like 4 times over as I'm backing away from him. I'm going to show it in my video, but I will show it in my video that I'm working on. But it is a thing where like the bosses are built to counteract things you do. But given that, you can abuse their AI where they look like absolute tools, right? Where they just function like brain dead idiots just reacting to code instead of doing something to deal with you, right? It's like they are programmed to deal with specific moves with other specific moves. But if you're in a different position, you can abuse the fuck out of that AI, which makes them feel like AI, you know. But again, that will show up in a video I am working on. It'll take a while to get through because... as I mentioned it in a previous stream, but basically just is I'm going over the top 5, for those who don't know, I'm going over the top 5 best and worst aspects of Elden Ring, including the DLC. And these are going to be sort of like general concepts. They're not going to be specific like bosses or areas or stuff like that. It's going to be general concepts. You're making me fidget every time you bring up the Elden Ring video. Oh, it's going to be a fun video. It'll be a fun video. You'll see. But so far, I'm going to record 10 different builds for this video, or 10 different runs of this for this video, and they're going to be in pairs. So there's going to be 2 tank builds, 2 mage builds, 2 faith builds, 2 arcane builds, and 2 glass cannon builds. And the first build in each of those pairs is going to be a progression run where you slowly go through each area sort of naturally, and just kind of use whatever you pick up as you go along. The second run is going to be a knowledge run where I know what I'm going for. I'm going to farm like crazy. I'm going to do crazy shit to get my build going as early as possible with the gear that I want as early as possible. Right? That's the kind of shit I'm going to be dealing with. Now, I'm not going to be going to the extreme level that like Infa or some of these speedrunners might do, but I am going to be basically, here's a run of natural progression. Here's a run with knowledge where I can farm crazy shit before I get into an area. And I'm going to be doing 10 builds. Or not 10 builds, 10 runs across 5 builds like that. So by the end of this, I will have a good grasp on all the different ways you can fuck with bosses and the world and all the other things. So that video is going to be a big one. Right now, I've completed the tank runs. I'm nearly done with the mage runs. I need to do the DLCs, and then I'm basically caught up. But I am getting through them pretty well. So we will see how that goes when that video comes out, but it will be a doozy because it'll be very different from my other videos. It'll be a very interesting one-off. So we'll see how that goes. It's taking time, but it is getting there. Anyway, let's talk about Radagon.
In general, this is how I approached many of the game's bosses near the end. I would respect them and try to avoid and punish, but the second I got a whiff of unreactable bullshit, I just traded them down. Toward the end of the fight, Radagon gains the ability to teleport Nothing Personal Kid away from any attack you make on him, and there's flat out no way I saw to predict when he will do this, and no time to react to it if he did so in response to me trying to punish one of his combos. I would attack, he would dice roll into a teleport, and then re-emerge on top of me to do damage.
Yeah, this is one thing that and this is one thing I will say. He is taking the longest form of an attack with this heavy weapon that already hits slowly to hit Radagon. So that's him making a mistake. But those teleporting away and attacking like are so fast. Like watch this little bit that he's about to show here.
I would attack.
We also get to see drunk Joseph, right? Let me mute this real quick. Let's get back to this other sort of what he's doing, right? He starts the jump, Radagon teleports away, reappears, hits, and then has a combo to smack you after he already hits you. And this is within like how fast is this within? All right, so it starts off at like okay, near the end of 45-second mark, he appears like in the 46-second mark, and then the attack comes through in the 47-second mark. So you've got like 2 seconds to deal with an attack that will probably catch you out and stun you. And that's the kind of shit that I hate, is when the bosses have movesets that are so fast that you can't do anything in the time it takes you to deal with the boss attack, right? You either continue to dodge away during the combo, or you just get smacked and your heal or hit gets negated or traded. You know, it's just really cheap way to counteract what the player is doing. Now, granted, he is doing one of the slowest attacks he can do in this scenario, right? But it's still really shitty to just have a quick little peck just to damage the player like that. Yeah, the teleport opens you up for a guaranteed follow-up hit while already doing damage. Yep, it's just those little cheap shit moves are what make the fights really annoying.
Of me to do damage. Now, if the game was built around this type of thing, I would be quite happy with this kind of interaction. Just like enemies having input reading powers to always throw a projectile when you heal, it would be fun to have a battle of wits where you can react to their reaction, and they could cycle it forward with another reaction until eventually one of you loses and damage is dealt. That could be fun. Being helpless because the enemy randomly lucked out is not. I'll end this section with this. We're at the point with this boss design now that player attacks need much faster recoveries and possibly the ability to cancel, again like Sekiro allows for the first 10th of the swing or so. The move buffer also has to be changed to avoid times where you can hit roll, get hit before it goes through because you mistimed it, and then roll after recovering from the stagger into another hit that you weren't allowed to react to because it kept your first roll inputs.
Okay, I think what he's talking about is the roll catching after the game misinputs what you're trying to do, right? Which I think is what he's about to say, but I need to read this text. It can queue 2 attacks from one button press as well, especially on jumping attacks. This sort of thing happens so much that I'm confident it's not an error on my part. Sometimes I was really careful to only press L1 once in the air, and I would attack automatically again when I landed after the jump attack. And I've had that happen too, where you essentially are hitting the button to attack, and you might hit it twice, but you hit it so fast that you don't think the game will register it, but the game will register it, which ends up becoming a thing where you're hitting a button essentially trying to get something to happen, and then once it does happen, you stop hitting it, but the game registers that you keep wanting to do the thing, so it continues to do the thing. So it's essentially the game overreacting to your inputs, which makes you fuck up even more, essentially. How that worked? You react to their reaction, but then why would the AI stop reacting to you perfectly? Yeah, I don't really know what he was getting at with that. I'm just going to move on because I'd like to finish this video today. But it is weird. But I think what he's getting at is sort of input reading that gets affected by input lagging, pretty much, where your inputs are lagged into the next action you do when you don't want that to happen. You know.
You should only eat 1 hit for messing up a timing, not 2 because of the input buffer. Enemies in this series usually had to abide by the same rules as the player, and that's not true anymore. Unfortunately, it's hard to know what's intended here though. Are these issues the result of From deciding they want the game to be this punishing and a bit unfair, or were these the last string of bosses, which are all coincidentally at the end of the game in areas that don't have the enemy variety that we're used to, and also feel a little rushed in other ways, not tested enough to work out these kinks? Or is this type of punishment a kink for From in another way? On my second playthrough, I used magic and ash spirit summons. I also picked up a moon veil thinking it would work well with my spells as a side piece, and that ended up being more powerful than my magic. That sword is so busted that it overtook it. My side piece was stronger than my main, which is the only time in my life I'll ever have something in common with Drake. Playing this way, the game was a breeze, and I began to wonder if this was the intended experience for difficulty and anything harder is a challenge mode akin to going fists only and the like. But the way summons work still breaks the AI on fights to such an extent that I can't accept it. Why would From put all the work into the game just to have you use a summon and not even have a fight? Just a boss pinata that ignores you while your summon holds aggro. The footage you're seeing now is after this ability, and the Moon Veil were nerfed in a patch too. They're still that powerful. If this is the kind of game they want their Souls line to be now, then that's fine. Stuff like Sekiro and Bloodborne can be the more focused ones built around more narrow gameplay options. But that change needs to be communicated better, and honestly, they're also wasting so much time and money making all these extravagant moves if that's the case, because you barely see them when playing like this. That problem is here too for me. The moveset of the Moonveil and Magic when fighting through levels was quite a lot of fun, but it had the opposite problem of Dark Souls 1. Things on the player end were varied enough, but the enemies were not, because they don't know how to react to this kind of loadout. It was like I was Sekiro in a Dark Souls game, and they didn't know what to do. They still dodge on spellcast instead of incoming damage. Boss AI doesn't know how to handle more than one target, and enemies will just stand there and let you shoot them. Or even bosses will let you weapon art them down if you stay at a mid-range distance. It's the same.
Yeah, and we've all seen that shit too, where just bosses just become retarded just out of nowhere. They just cannot function. They just can't do anything. It's just like, and it's one of those things where I just don't get what I imagine the problem is somewhere in the coding where the boss is supposed to react to the player if they do a certain action within a certain distance, right? Like, it happened with Melania in one of my recent fights where I was fighting her with a summon, or with summons as a spellcaster, and I was shooting her with spells from a distance, right? She slowly walked towards me while I was spamming spells while my summons were whacking her, right? And then out of nowhere, she does like 4 dodges to like get closer to me, like in a row, right? And I don't know why she did them all in a row, right? And I was using a night spell, right, which is largely untrackable by the AI in the game, right? So this was not something that she was doing consistently throughout the fight. She just randomly did her little like dash forward towards me like several times in a row out of nowhere. And I think it's because the enemies are probably programmed to dash towards you if you are casting a spell and if you are within a certain distance, because she didn't do it when I was really far away. She did it when I was in sort of a mid-range, about the distance of where he is to this dragon right now. And so I think all of the AI have that kind of problem where they just don't know how to deal with certain moves in certain distances. And that can lead to shit like this. And it's also funny because I forget what video it is, but one of my videos on Elden Ring, I think probably for my Road to Commander series, there's a point where I just sit and shoot a dragon across a chasm because the dragon won't attack me. He just walks towards me in place and doesn't actually physically move anywhere. And I just slowly poke him in the head with like poison arrows or something. It was one of those moments of like, wow, you have a dragon which has fire breath and wings and can fly and lightning, and it's not able to hit me because the AI is just broken. Like those moments are rampant in games like this when you just make them huge. And now we've got problems of they're either ridiculously overpowered when they do fight us, or they're brain dead idiots when they don't work. And so it's just kind of broken. Shit, I can accept it. Me and Dung Eater will be waiting on you at the boss Grace after a 10-second bullying session. Okay.
Problem that was in
Let's wrap this video up.
Souls 1. Playing like this makes you feel like you're the only one in the world with a gun. The game practically screams at you to use range magic on some fights, but then when you do, it's boring, and also so safe that you now need a good reason to do anything else, which the game doesn't provide. The world of Elden Ring is stunning. The journey I had through it was amazing. The dungeon design was a work of genius, and the combat that filled it as the game neared the end bored me to tears even if the visual feast continued. If these issues are fixed in post-launch support, then I'll be happy for that, but my first playthrough of this game is tarnished forever because of them. And for that, I will always remember Elden Ring as an experience shattered into two sets of pieces. The amazing exploratory parts that will define all open-world games going forward, and the fights that were so bad that they marked the end of my interest in this series.
It's very similar to how I feel. Let's see what he has to say at the end here. There's a most replayed section here, and I wonder why that is.
Here are a few loose points I couldn't fit into the script naturally, and as you could probably tell, it was already getting messy toward the end. And sorry for all the improvised bits. This bit's improvised. The sentence before this wasn't, but this was. I'm apologizing for improvising with an improvisation. Go me. The new guard counter ability is really cool. At first I thought it was overkill because shields tend to be easier to use than rolling because of how safe they are in terms of timings and the like, but figuring out when to use your counter respective to your stamina and the enemy combo is good. I'd like to do a full shield run because of this. It might be more fun than rolling, or a hybrid of both could be ideal. The barricade...
This is one thing of him talking about this. I would actually argue that I don't like the guard counter thing because the buttons that you use to do it can fuck with the way that you're blocking with your shield, right? Because you have to hit, at least on PC, you have to hit you basically hit you basically have to hit them in a short enough time span where you don't activate your weapon art, but you also have to time it with the enemy recently hitting you, which can end up with you using your weapon art or just doing a regular attack instead of doing your guard counter, right? It's similar to kicking in the previous Souls games where you have to you have to hit forward and your attack button at the same time to kick, but sometimes the inputs are barely off, and so you attack or you just move forward, and that's kind of a similar problem I've had with the guard blocking in this game compared to this. We have more time. Let's look at VG Matthews' boss critique. No, not yet. We're finishing this video and then I'm stopping the stream. We're doing it.
Art of War is another neat addition for this loadout. You're clearly meant to play with something in each hand. I'm showing some timings for swings and recovery here with different loadouts, and when you consider how much more damage power stancing two weapons is compared to two-handing just one, it's an easy conclusion that something isn't balanced right. I don't think dual wielding should be the only way to play a melee-only guy without a shield. This is even worse when you realize that all dual wielders can still two-hand a weapon for that moveset with one command, meaning the one and only drawback is the added equipment load stress, which is practically meaningless as the game goes on. If you're not playing with two weapons, even if they are colossals or a weapon plus a shield or caster thing, then you are making things much harder for yourself than you might think, compared to choosing to do the same in the previous games with going two-handed on one weapon. Getting your first great rune...
Wait a minute, what was that point he was making? Is he fighting for or against dual wielding here? Because I couldn't quite tell if he was saying one thing or the other.
Practically meaningless as the game goes on. If you're not playing with two weapons, even if they are colossals or a weapon plus a shield or caster thing, then you are making things much harder for yourself than you might think.
I mean, is he saying you are not
playing with two weapons, even if they are colossals or a weapon plus a shield or caster thing, then you are making things much harder for yourself than you might think.
Okay, yeah, okay. Thanks for clarifying that, yeah. I missed the if you are or aren't in that sentence, and that fucked me over. But yeah, I mean, I've done a bit where I've two-handed colossal weapons, and that double tapping is really helpful. It's like when you hit with a super heavy weapon, but you have two of them, and you essentially double tap them with a huge hit. It's pretty good. I think he means that the game is way harder if you just play with one weapon. Yeah, I caught up. I read the chat and I figured it out. Not necessarily power stance something. Yeah. Oh man.
compared to choosing to do the same in the previous games with going two-handed on one weapon. Getting your first great rune is an amazing moment. You're given what feels like an organic quest to unlock the power of this huge legendary thing, and it makes the world feel massive. You have to figure out how to get to the appropriate divine tower, overcome some challenge on the way, and then have this mystical conclusion at the top, like a great epilogue for the legacy dungeon you just did. And then the tutorial message lies to you and says you'll get some benefit from equipping it that can be improved further by using a rune arc, but nope, you need the rune arc on for anything to happen at all. This
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, this is one thing that I really don't like about the whole like rune arc and great rune thing is that you can equip a great rune, but that doesn't do shit if you don't have, the rune arcs. It feels very limited, if you know what I mean. Like it's, it's one of those things where it's like it's kind of like having humanity but not having it on, but you can't farm these as far as I can tell. I don't think there's any vendor that sells them, and I don't think any enemy consistently drops rune arcs. I think there's a very limited number of them in the game, and there's no way to replenish it without doing like online shit, which is already cancerous in and of itself, right? So like I don't really know what they were thinking with this rune arc shit. I mean, we get to in my runs, I usually just ignore rune arcs until I get to a boss where I need everything I can to deal with it. Rune arcs are so rare as well. It could have been an upgrade to humanity and embers, but they're so damn rare. And you can farm them offline, but the drop rates are pathetically low. Really? Yeah, I mean, even if you just had a vendor that sells them for an expensive amount, like in Dark Souls 1, you could farm humanity in different places from different enemies. They had a decent chance to drop them, but you could also buy them from what's his face, the Bloodborne guy near the Artorias arena. He sells an infinite number of humanity. Now they are like 10,000 souls, right? So they're expensive, but he still sells them in large quantities, right? And you can continuously buy them. If we had a vendor that sold rune arcs for like 10,000 runes or 20,000 runes or something, I'd be fine with that. Yeah, they're expensive, but they're infinite. The problem isn't really the price. It's that can we get infinite amounts of them without having to do a whole bunch of like crazy farming or like a bunch of online bullshit. And it's just like we just gotta do what we gotta do, I guess. And we just have to suffer, which tends to be a recurring through line through these games where we just have to suffer. I think he only has 7 humanity or something. I think he has infinite. I think he will sell a lot. Actually, now that I think about it, I think it might be him or Patches. I think one of them has infinite humanity. Let me look. Let me look this up real quick. So let me go to the Dark Souls wiki and look this up. Humanity. All right. Humanity consumable. See. Oh, they do have limited ones. I thought he had unlimited because I've bought several from him. Yeah, I guess I just wasn't paying attention. My bad. My bad. Well, damn. Now Dark Souls has a problem too. Fuck. At least it's farmable from like rats and stuff in the game, so I guess that kind of makes up for it. But still, the main point is just like it'd be nice if there was a consistent way to get these that wasn't just farm enemies over and over and over. Well.
This sucks and made doing these journeys a hell of a lot less exciting. If these were fun passives, even at low levels without the rune arc, then this would have been a very rewarding system and made these quests much more memorable.
This is one thing about the great runes that he is bringing up, though, is like if you had, I wish that equipping one would do like a lesser form of the bonus. You know what I mean? Like Godric's rune, for example, right? It does 5 extra points and each stat when you have it like with the rune arc activated. Wouldn't it be cool if maybe you got a boost of like 2 passively, or maybe 5 is the passive, and then the upgraded version is like 10, like something crazy like that. Or take like Morgoth's rune where he gives like a big bonus to health. Maybe increase the health if it's like got the rune arc activated, something like that. You know, like make the rune arcs a little bit more dynamic than having to use this. Because it is kind of annoying when you get a rune arc, but then you don't get anything unless you activate it, and then you essentially can lose that. You know, it's a lot of work to get one reward that if you die, it's gone, right? And you have to replenish it somehow and do all this other extra shit.
I hope this is glitched and fixed later, but like I just said, even if so, my first run for these is ruined forever. The camera is much better in Sekiro for giant enemies. It moves and changes so you can always see what they're doing, and I don't understand why there's such a big regression from that game to this one. Dragon Lord in this game also has an AoE indicator for a big explosion he can do. Why isn't that a standard for communication on difficult to judge moves? Likewise, the double demon fight in Ring City has a trail that appears before a fire attack goes along the floor.
Wait a minute. Was he complaining about Placidusac's move there?
Dragon Lord in this game also has an AoE indicator for a big explosion he can do. Why isn't that a standard for communication on difficult to judge moves?
Oh, okay. He's saying this is good. Why isn't there more of it? Okay. I misunderstood his point. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, like there are several AoE moves that have like a targeted sort of area on the ground that reveals where it is. Radigan and Godfrey are good examples of that. It's just the radius of them is so massive that it's hard to get away from them.
Likewise, the double demon fight in Ring City has a trail that appears before a fire attack goes along the floor. And you have a similar fight in this game where you're fighting two gargoyles that can do a poison attack from off screen in the same way, and it just shows up dealing damage to you. It's like they forgot all the lessons they learned from the previous games. Malekith sucks so bad that I don't even want to talk about him because I'll have to fight him more to demonstrate my points, and I don't want to put myself through it. Meanwhile, this Godfrey...
Wow, that's a totally different thing. It's like, yeah, Malekith's pretty relentless, but like he's, you know, you kind of have to play Malekith aggressively to do anything in his fight, which is the one thing I would kind of say is a pro and a con at the same time. Like you have to be aggressive with him, otherwise he will just whittle you down. But he's also got a very tough moveset that I think is still fair, but it is tough. Like I think he's kind of right at the line in terms of like difficult but fair before it becomes difficult and unfair. You know, because his moves are dodgeable and they are like you can deal with them, and he does have openings. You know, and his moveset is telegraphed. I think it is a thing of just he's kind of like right at the line, and then a lot of things after him sort of push past the line. Plus his first phase is just really annoying, but that's besides the point.
Fight felt cool, but I beat him so quickly on all of my runs that I can't say much. He's a fair boss with too little HP, so he's poorly designed in another way. Would have been better if he was a longer fight to match his fairness, like Elden Ring's version of Nameless King. Here are some more examples.
Wow, I completely disagree. Like he shat on Malekith when I like Malekith for the most part, and he's praising this guy when I shat on him. So here we are. Malekith's openings are noticeably larger than Beast Clergyman's, which is kind of ridiculous. Yeah, just Beast Clergyman's just way too fast, I think. But him talking about this fight having too little HP, I think he just has too much HP. Or not too much HP, but I think he just has too many AoE spams. It's just like, it's weird. It's like we agreed on the same points with the same problems throughout the bosses, and then we have totally different takes on like the couple of bosses that he's actually talking about right now. It's very weird. This is what I'm talking about, right? Like he'll have the same logic we do, but he'll end up with different results for things for totally different reasons. And it's that weird part of like, it's like I follow your logic, and then it just takes a radical shift in a different direction. I'm like, what? No, Joseph, did you learn nothing from Fire Giant? We don't need longer fights. Yes. Fire Giant's the best example of that. Don't make fights longer.
Of bad boss placements. The Falling Star Beast in the mines is terrible. It can roll into the wall for ages because it's not meant to be fought in an enclosed space. And yet, here it is. Most of its moves are actually fun, but this isn't set up right at all. The one in the volcano zone is much better and also acts as an awesome, surprising moment of tense escalation when you jump up with torrents. The other two Falling Star beasts in the game rob this fight of being a special, unique memory. The game would have been better off without the others, even if nothing replaced them. Similarly, the magma worm dragon things are all over the place. The climb up from Liurnia to Altus could have been made more epic if it was like the reverse of what you do in Blight Town for reaching a new area. This could have been expanded to a mini legacy dungeon, and if a unique boss was too much work, making this the only place you see this magma worm would have been great. It kind of matches Gaping Dragon in terms of how it's structured here, doesn't it? Huh. That's weird to realize, especially since this fight is also crammed into another small mine room in Caelid where it's also not tuned properly.
Yeah, this is one big problem too. They do like much better. My dude, full grown Falling Star Beast sucks. He shits on melee builds with how much he resists physical damage. Yeah, yeah. I mean, my biggest thing about these fights with these particular type of enemies, like the Falling Star Beast and the Magma Worms, is that they're very particular fights, and they are not good in close encounters. And they put a lot of Magma Worms in very close encounters, which makes them incredibly annoying, especially when they have that run move that can damage you and covers half the arena in lava that lingers for a decent amount of time. Right, you have just overcompensated to make this enemy as hard as fucking possible, given what they can do, like, given their aesthetic, right? And the Falling Star Beast, I actually think, could have worked, in two separate encounters. Like, I think the one in Altus Plateau is fine, like, as an introduction to it, and then expanding upon it with a tougher version of it with a bigger move set in Volcano Manor is a good thing. Cramming it inside an arena like this is terrible, though. And you can see that from the AoE move that we just watched, where it completely covers the arena in that area. If I can find it. Like, let's find that one move. I think it's this move, right? Like, that covers like 90% of the arena. Like, that's ridiculous, right? That's just way too much. That's way too big of a spell to put in a tiny arena like that. Plus, the Magma Worms are just annoying with all their AoE spam. I mean, there's a really big problem in this game where just enemies AoE spam all the damn time. And that gets so old. Especially when the majority of the solutions to it is just run away from the boss. Like when the best solution is just not to engage with the boss, then you've made a bad boss.
Crammed into another small mine room in Caelid where it's also not tuned properly. The amount of stomping and lava you have to deal with in a small room is just dumb, but hey, I'm happy that the Moonveil users have to suffer to get their weapon. Radon and Rykard and some of the other gimmick bosses in this game are also hard to judge. Visually, they're very cool. Thematically, they're very cool too. They're some of the most successful gimmick bosses that the series has ever had, but in terms of gameplay, Radon you can fight one of three ways: solo on foot, solo on your horse, or a mix of those while summoning the army around the area. That's probably the best way to do it, but it still is kind of boring. On horse, it has the problem that you can just get knocked off and then killed. In general, the horse is kind of lame, and I really hate that you can be out in the world and suddenly one little guy can hit you once, and that staggers you into being hit a million times and then knocked off your horse. But
yeah, this is one thing that he's saying. Yeah, that's one thing that he's saying about this. Like the fights with the horse combat, I think are really shit. Just because the horse combat in general is really shit. Torrent has no fucking poise. It's like he could get poked by a mosquito and he would freeze. You would get stun locked by like a mosquito, right? And I'm not talking about the mosquito enemies in the game. I'm talking about actual mosquitoes. Like I think the Torrent and mounted combat in general sucks in this game. Yeah, like if Torrent, I wish we could upgrade Torrent, right? Like if we could put, imagine if we could put armor on him and like give him, like level him up too. Then we could actually have like reasons why some Torrents are like different versions of Torrent would be better for different situations, right? Imagine if you could have Torrent be like a sub build when mounting, like that'd be fucking awesome. Right? Like imagine a tank Torrent where you could put like heavy armor on him to reduce the damage he takes and increase his poise, but it slows him down. Right? That could be such a fucking cool thing. But they just said, no, he's just a horse that eats raisins and occasionally gets stun locked to death. Have fun. It's like, you had potential. Bruh. How did they not see it as an issue that giving us a horse that struggled in Limgrave would serve poorly the entire game? I know, right? Like, I just don't get... Yeah, I just don't get the justification for having mounted combat against bosses, let alone, like, enemies that can stun lock you to death easily, right? You know, it just feels unrefined, right? But going back to what he said about Radon, I think he's just being personally biased against Radon. I think the Radon fight's great, you know, and I think it's great because it really owns its aesthetic, right, in a way that is fair without being utterly ridiculous. Now, the mounted aspect of it is shitty, but the mounted combat is shitty generally, like across the board. So I don't hold that against that fight specifically, right? But I do think the Radon fight is a really good one of using its gimmick to the fullest while still making it fair and challenging. But anyway, we're almost there. We're almost done. Let's see what he has to say about the other bosses.
It also doesn't work here, even though it kind of feels intended. Radon is on a horse, you can be on a horse too. You're allowed to do it so you can close the gap between you and him, and also you can jump over some of his shockwave moves, but yet it's still not good because you don't have the iframes needed to dodge all the rest of his moves. You can joust him, but he also has some quick attacks that can just knock you off, so it's not really ever safe. On foot, the issue is that you can't see him.
Now, that combo that he just went through, that Joseph just went through right there, that was a really badly timed combo on the boss's part. Which makes me think that he only beat him maybe once or twice. Because that combo that Radon just did, where he does the... like he's got the meteor defenses, then he does the slam for the little seeking things, and then he does the AoE. I've rarely had that combo happen, right? That is a massive combo stack that rarely happens, right? Like, in all the time I've played Elden Ring, that's probably happened maybe like twice, right? Like, that is a very rare occurrence. And this is one thing that is sort of like a running problem with Joseph's content from stuff I've seen and stuff I've heard about him from like other people who have watched his videos and what he's said in different streams and stuff like that, is he'll play a game once or twice and then he'll talk about it. And he tends to talk about it from a very subjective lens of his own opinions without accounting for what other players might think. And that is one thing that's hard to do with games like this, because you do have to replay them a lot to get the full picture of what bosses can do and what you can do in return. But it is a thing where it is kind of a problem with his sort of way of doing things. This is one reason why I want to give a game time to cover, and why I don't cover new games just because they're new. Like, I play games for fun, and then if I have a strong opinion about them, I will replay them several times to get a good feel for them and then make a video about it. But this is also part of the way he does things, right? Like, I do things after games are completed, you know, whereas he tries to make videos as fast as possible. I didn't even know he could do that, Lemeo. Yeah, well, I didn't remember him being able to do that either, but apparently he can.
But it's still probably the best way to fight him, I guess. I don't know. I really don't like this fight. And it's also received changes in a patch, so I guess that shows you that other people aren't too happy about it either. Rykard fares better and just feels like a better version of the Yorm fight from Dark Souls 3. The weapon you get here is really cool to use, it feels satisfying to hit him in the head with it, and while my first time I just ran into the lava to see if I could kill him with my regular sword, I think this way is actually kind of fun, but when I did do it this way, he just fell over and the fight was more of a spectacle, which is fine. Some fights can be spectacles. Another issue...
Some fights can be spectacles. They still have to be fucking good, Joseph.
Issue with the bosses, especially the multi-phase ones, is that you can't really design the first part of the fight as well as you could because it has to be a prelude to the second one. Now, this can work if it's the same entity that you're fighting, or there's a phase change halfway through their health bar and it's balanced accordingly, but when it's two fights that are put together, I can't help but think that this is just a bad idea unless it's done for a really, really good reason. On the one hand, we have things like the Renala fight, where it feels like the first part is kind of a fun gimmick, kind of like a better version of Deacons of the Deep from Dark Souls 3 again. You know, it's okay, but once you see Phase 2, this just becomes part of the run back, which is already kind of long. So I don't know...
Which is already kind of wrong. Dude, you run out of the Grace, go up some stairs, cross a bridge, and then you're back at the fucking boss again. That's not a long boss run. Even if you take the first path forward, before the shortcut, you run forward, jump onto a bridge, run up it, go up an elevator, you're back at the boss again. It does not take long to get back to Renala, my dude. And her first phase is like super easy to deal with. Find the little fucker singing, slap him. Find the other little fuckers singing, slap them. Then beat the shit out of Renala. Repeat that maybe once again, maybe another time, maybe 3 times total. Then you actually fight Renala. That's not a lot of work. It's like, holy shit. On the Radon patch, I heard they actually went back on the nerf, but addressed the hitbox issues. Yeah, I've heard Radon has had some serious like patching to and fro in terms of like how difficult he is. Like he was ridiculously hard at first, then they made him too easy, and then they kind of like settled sort of somewhere in the middle, from what I understand. I will bite my tongue on boss rebuffs, especially in this game, because there is a gimmick to him. He isn't absurdly hard. Yeah. Dying to Renala is absurd, Joseph. I mean, dying to Renala usually only happens in sort of the second phase of this second phase, when she starts spawning enemies that can stun lock you. Either that, or you just have ridiculously low health, and she like taps you with a spell or something. Like, I don't consider Renala that hard. It's usually just a thing where, you know, the last bit of this fight can be annoying because she summons dudes.
If this was a good idea, it kind of limits the design space that they have for the second part of this fight, which is kind of lame and could have been much better to match how majestic it looks. Like, this is a really cool fight, kind of feels like Rom the Vacuous Spider from Bloodborne, and yet it just falls over. It's kind of a shame.
I like how he compares this to Rom, an objectively provable terrible fight by comparison, and says this is terrible. It's like, dude, this is not, this isn't terrible. Right? It's a spellcaster fighting like a spellcaster. Yeah, they summon shit. That's annoying. And the first phase can be tedious if you repeat it, but this isn't... It's not that hard of a fight to begin with. It's like, holy shit. Yeah, and the spell stun locks if you fuck up is kind of crazy. Also, this is literally mage personified. Runs away the entire time spamming summons. Yeah. I also think, I don't think her moveset is actually that bad. Like, the only time I think you'll be quote unquote like insta-killed or combo killed is if the summons that if she summons one of the big summons, like the dragon or the big troll thing, and they knock you down, and then a bunch of spells hit you at once, which I think is probably only going to happen if you're not paying attention, or if you're, you know, fucking up your positioning, right? But this is also a problem with her fight in general, is her summoning people is really bad. You know, but everything else I think is pretty okay.
Radagon is worse. This is one of the most epic moments in the game, and even though I complained about this fight earlier, I really did enjoy the link back to the first reveal trailer of the game, and the music kicking in, and the way that the boss's attacks link back to that trailer, and the shattering of the Elden Ring. It's a really cool concept, and yet because this has to serve as the first part or introduction of a totally new fight that comes right after, that you have to do again to see that fight, it really limits how far they could have gone with it. Admittedly, it does feel like a full fight, so I don't feel like they missed out on too much, but this might come back to some balance issues, or it wasn't tested properly. I'll get my final dig on Elden Beast here by saying,
one thing I wish is that killing the summons gave you something out of it, like a guaranteed riposte on her or something. I mean, I just rather that she didn't summon like the summons that she has. I mean, like the wolf summon, it's like, okay, those are really weak enemies. I could probably deal with them. There's only like 3 or 4. I think there's 4, right? They're not ridiculous to deal with. They're annoying, but they're not ridiculous, right? Then you get the Bloodhound, right? It's like you've got bleed on top of a fast enemy that can stun me and slap me to the ground. That's annoying. Then you've got a giant fucking troll with AoE stomps and stuff like that. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Then you have a fucking dragon, and it's like, what the fuck? Stop summoning weird shit. Right? You may as well just summon another boss at this point. Just summon a second Renala at this point. Just fuck it. You know? It's like the summoning doesn't need to be in the fight. She's a mage. Just give her more spells to use. Like, she's a fucking mage. Let her do mage shit. But yeah, what he was talking about with Radagon and the Elden Beast is something I agree with too. Is just like Radagon feels like a full fight. That like the Elden Beast and Radagon both feel like full fights that they just stitched together afterwards because they wanted to make the encounter take longer and have you reset even farther back compared to if they were individual fights that led into each other. You know, I mean, like this could have been exactly like Dark Souls 2, you know, where you go in, you fight Throne Watcher and Defender, and then you fight Nashandra, right? It's like just one boss fight after another. And if you defeat one, you've defeated it. But if you die to the second one, you can come back and continue with that second boss. Tying these two together, I think, is a really bad. It's just a really bad idea because it makes the fight to the Elden Beast more tedious when you die to it, and it massively overplays Radagon as a boss that you've probably already beat and have to continuously beat if the Elden Beast kills you, right? So I think it damages both boss encounters to have them stitched together like that.
That it just flat out feels like this wasn't tested at all, to the point that I suspect that you were meant to be able to use your horse for this fight and they just forgot to flag the room for horse combat. And now that the game has been out for so long, they're too embarrassed to, admit that and flip it back on. Like me as
Well, I did they turn this back on? I never used torrent in this arena ever, just because I've gotten used to not using torrent in this arena. Can we do it now? Like like when did they patch that? Does anybody know? like the actual like date or roughly around the date when they actually patched torrent back into this? Was it recent or was it like after, like early on? Because I never remember torrent being available in this fight. Largely because he's not available for the Radagon fight, so why would he be available for this next fight, especially when they're put together? You don't see many fights where they start off with that and then they do it later. They patched it on patch 1.12, I think, when the DLC came out. Okay, so this is really recent. Like, this is not early on in the game's development, so this must have... It makes me think that maybe they understood player complaints and tried to give something to deal with it. I think, because this fight does feel like you're supposed to be on something that is faster than just your basic legs, but they didn't implement it. So it makes me think they just said, fuck it. And then after the player base complained, they added it later. But again, we still don't really know, unless he's about to say something that like is provable that Miyazaki wanted this to be a mounted fight, but didn't do it, but retroactively made it that way for X reason. I don't know.
that the game has been out for so long, they're too embarrassed to, admit that and flip it back on. Like Miyazaki could come to my house and tell me to my face that you weren't meant to have the horse here for real, and I wouldn't believe him because it just feels like you're meant to have the horse with how this monster can just jump around the place, and when you're chasing him on foot, it just feels absolutely awful. There's all this dead time that I just don't understand. Like, it also thematically fits with Torrent choosing you at the beginning and then just becoming this like non-entity that you just ride around on. It would have been nice if Torrent came back for the final fight as a link back to this new thing that was introduced in this game, but no, instead the fight just doesn't feel tested, doesn't feel finished, and is just miserable. This is possibly the worst final fight in any of these games, including Dark Souls 2, which, God, can I say that? At least, like, both these bosses kind of look cool. I won't show the Dark Souls 2 boss, but like, maybe Elden Beast isn't that bad. It's pretty bad though. I don't know. Oh, man, I hate the fight so much. I hate it.
I think that's him just ranting about it without thinking about it, because the Elden Beast fight is like, if the Elden Beast was isolated, right, as in you can get to the Fog Arena and immediately fight it, I don't think it's that bad. I think some of its moveset can be a bit problematic, right? Mainly the chasing orb that spews little orbs at you. But I think that is like one bad move out of several good moves that you can dodge. But I think the biggest problem with Radagon and with the Elden Beast is that they are linked together. So you have to deal with both of them in a single encounter, which feels like an arbitrary extension of difficulty and also a waste of time if you beat Radagon and then die to the Elden Beast because Radagon used up all your resources, right? Like, it really should have been separated. And I think the opinion on both of those bosses would actually change if they were separated, right? I think the opinion on their difficulty and how they function, like individually, I think would only improve if they were actually separated. I also think that he just doesn't like the Elden Beast because he hasn't gotten good at it. Like, when I get to the Elden Beast, the only problem I really have is that I run out of healing because I've fought Radagon before, right? Most of the problems with the Elden Beast come from not its moveset, from just the fact that I'm lower on resources than normal because I fought another hard boss previously. It's hardly ever because the moveset just outright kills me. Right, like I usually run out of healing by the time I am about to kill the Elden Beast, or when it like defeats me. Right, it's not really a matter of difficulty as much as just the stitching of two bosses together. What makes Elden Beast so bad for me is that you have to fight Radagon every single time. Yeah, that's the biggest thing. This makes me have to play super efficiently at all costs rather than trying to enjoy the bosses for what they are. Yeah, and also like it's that thing where imagine stitching any other two bosses next to each other. Like imagine if we had to stitch Gideon with Godfrey. That'd be fucking terrible, right? As an encounter, you get a spell spammer and then an AoE spammer right after that in the same boss fight. That'd be fucking terrible. Why are the last 5 bosses of the game sometimes separated but sometimes not, or they're two bosses like put together as one encounter? Like, why do they do it that way? I don't get it. Like, what's the fucking point? It's like if we already beat Radagon, let us beat Radagon. Like, just let us beat him and win and be able to go back to the Elden Beast if it kills us.
I do not understand who thought it was a good idea to reuse the Ancestor Spirit and Astal boss encounters. I can almost accept the Spirit as being one of a few of these altars in the underground, but the whole thing copy and pasted, including lighting the altars to activate it, leaves me dumbfounded. Astal is worse because it's the climax of one of the best sequences the game sends you on, and then the boss is duplicated as if from a casual hand wave in a cave mine dungeon in the snowfields. Why would you do that? Why? Like, imagine if there was another Millennia somewhere just with green hair and no explanation. Like, what? Speaking of, let's also...
That's actually a very good point that I'm going to bring up in my video. The amount of repeated assets is just pure laziness, just peak laziness, just taking hard shit and repeating it. And this is one thing I'm actually surprised that we did not get another Millennia in like the DLC. I'm actually genuinely surprised that we did not get a copy of her. Now, granted, we got Radon souped up and fucked over, and we got other bosses that have ridiculous shit, but we didn't get like another Millennia, right? Which I think is kind of funny to think about. But like with their rampant copy and pasting, it is very odd that they didn't repeat the hardest fucking boss they made. I don't mind the Ancestral Spirit reuse. It's not that bombastic of a boss anyway. Estelle, however, that is absurdly lazy. I think they're both lazy. They literally did that with Godefroy. Yeah, same thing. Just repeating shit again, just in a different area with numbers scaled up. I mean, I think the Ancestor Spirit is lessened because the fight isn't that difficult to reach and encounter in general. I mean, personally, I think the Ancestor Spirit should have just been a single boss where the weaker one is phase 1 and the stronger one is phase 2. I think that should have been it. I think having 2 of the same boss with the same movesets and maybe a slight tweak is just a waste of resources, in my opinion. I'd rather have one really great boss with 2 phases than have 2 bosses that are almost identical, but just the numbers are just shifted up. A literal shard bearer got a reuse. Yeah, I think this is one thing that I think about Consort Radon, like as like a concept, is I think it's From Software sort of unknowingly admitting that they will reuse whatever the fan base wants more of and then soup it up and make it ridiculous. And I think the fan base is beginning to push back on that idea a little bit, which I kind of like. Like, I'm glad that people are kind of saying, dude, why did you just repeat Radon again and then make him ridiculous? Why did you do that? Like, I'm glad to see that people are enjoying the DLC because I think there is some good shit in there. But I do think that there is sort of there is a large rumbling of people who disapprove of them just repeating assets in the DLC, especially for the main final boss. I personally like fighting an overtuned Estelle in a secret area. Gotta crank up those numbers. Don't say that, sheep. They'll listen and then make 5 more of him. It'll get boring. Please, no more. No more repeated shit. Make new shit, please. Don't just re-soup things we've already fought.
Also complain about Millennia some more. The fact that her healing ability still works when you block her attacks is ludicrous.
I'd agree with that. I think if you block it, I mean, this is one thing too, is like you could make the self-healing work. Like if her grab restored health, I'd be okay with that. Like it's a grab, right? You can dodge that. When every single fucking attack she does it, that's ridiculous, man. That's just way too much compensation.
was for a greatly reduced amount, then that would be fine, but her full healing on blocked hits, like she's wielding my glitched out vampiric super sledge from Fallout 76, invalidates this playstyle. Why doesn't she attack the air in front of her to heal as well? You should not demand players to have to change over to something else at the end of the game or deal with an unbelievably more difficult fight than what it should be compared to how it functions for other builds. I want to stress I'm perfectly fine with some builds being better or worse for some fights. The issue here is how extremely punishing this is for a core part of some block builds.
I mean, this is one thing too that this game definitely does with this fight in particular, is it really unless you have a very particular type of tank build, you're going to have a really hard time with Melania, because she will just heal and heal and heal and heal and heal through your attacking. And that's just fucking annoying and tedious in the most simple way possible. It's like she can't really hit you through the shield unless she does like special attacks, but she's also healing constantly, so it just delays the fight even more. It's just really annoying. It hurts. It's like there was no point in Mikola even existing because we don't get to fight him. We never get to fight Mikola. Yeah, it's annoying. Like the Death Knight. Oh, the Death Knight. Don't mention the Death Knight. Fuck those Death Knights. Imagine if we heard so much amazing shit about Gwyn and he was relegated to riding someone's back, hardly even being there. Yeah, that would suck. Attacking the air healed her at one point. Technically, yeah. It was a glitch, but it existed. Yeah. I mean, she technically attacks you at the very end of Waterfowl Dance with that extra burst, and I think it still heals her. Might be wrong about that, but like it's still ridiculous.
I really wish Caelid had a proper legacy dungeon. An expanded version of the surprisingly good Poison Castle in Altus could have worked here. I was expecting some sunken insectoid hive-type place under the central lake, but there's nothing. I guess the underground stretch could count as Caelid's dungeon, but it doesn't feel like that to me. Meanwhile, Mount Gilmere feels like 2 legacy zones in one, with the outdoor stretch leading into the manor. It's a really good double area. And before I start going off on some other things and some of the bad hitboxes I found, I'm going to end it here, properly this time. Elden Ring is a great game. If it gets some DLC, I'll probably do a video on that too. Maybe one day I'll do a commentary style thing for the zones and bosses also on the second channel. Some of them I didn't see much because they either died too fast or made me hit trade. If hit trading is the future for this series, they need to do some big changes for it to be fun. Bosses need to do less damage, but also have way more health. Players need fewer healing charges, but also need to use them less often. Lots of balancing like that, in my opinion. I'm hoping they find a way to make it work, but I'm doubtful at the moment. My more enthusiastic interest for From's games will be whatever they make next that's like Sekiro or Bloodborne. The latter of which seems to be the best way to proceed now. It has the best of everything they do, and with a few more defensive options or a jump button, could rival Sekiro for combat complexity while still having build variety from all of the trick weapons. Somehow, I'm still talking. I need to stop.
Oh my god, he made that Acer point of build variety with different weapons. It's like, that's not what builds are. That's not what builds are. Fuck. Excuse you, Joseph. More health? I know, right? Like, fuck you. Why do you want longer fights so bad? Yeah, it's like he wants longer fights, but he doesn't want them. I think I get what he's trying to go for, but he's communicating it really poorly. I think he wants longer fights where he can damage the boss more often instead of longer fights where he spends time away from the boss while they're doing a combo or some stupid shit, right? Like, I think he wants a longer fight with less ridiculous moves, if you know what I mean. You know, like less time running away from the boss, more time just like chinking down their health bar, right? I think that's what he's going for, but he's wording it really badly. For real, why do you say naughty swears, Vangaris? What do you mean? What you like? What you think? Wait, are you thinking like the way I used chink was bad? Chink's a regular word. I didn't use it in a bad way. You know, and you said sheep's gonna cry. You said a bad word. A certain video. Oh, okay. I misinterpreted that. My bad. I'm so used to people being offended over stupid shit on the internet, so like I don't know, but yeah, he who must not be recalled. Yeah, but just like that kind of thing of like, yeah, Bloodborne's great with its combat that's largely the same the entire time. The only difference is the weapons you use. Yay.
Having build variety from all of the trick weapons. Somehow, I'm still talking. I need to stop. It's amazing and a little sad how much of Elden Ring's world I could praise in this video, and yet for gameplay, I ended up showering praise onto other games instead. See you next time.
All right. Well, that's the Joseph Anderson video. I misinterpreted that too. Please don't put us through that again. Sorry. But yeah, so that was the Joseph Anderson video. Some good points in there. Some really, really, really weird ones too. But we'll see what we have in the future. So that was it. That was it. We did it. Good for us. Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out what we should do next. That wasn't too bad, surprisingly. Yeah, I was actually pleasantly surprised with a lot of the points he was making. Now, based on what people have said about his DLC video, I'm really curious what he said, because it sounds like he went back on a lot of things and contradicted himself in the DLC video. So I'm really curious where that's gonna end up. But I guess we'll have to see what happens next. You have a video for us next time. Remember, sheep, there is a Discord in the description. Hopefully I remembered to paste it in there. So that will be a thing at some point. So expect that in the near future, because I would really, really, really like to. I want to kind of branch out and do some other sort of stuff on this channel that's not just reacting to Souls people. But it's in there. I think I see it. Good. Yeah. So yeah, basic gist of it is there should be a Discord in there. And there should be a general. Oh, I see you. I see you came in. Hey, sheep. I see you. Yay! I have made technology happen. So yeah, there's a text channel for ESAS video recommendations. So you can just throw it in there, and I will go through it later. So yeah, just that's where we are right now. It's real. Everyone join. Join, the server's real. I appreciate the promotion. But yeah, I'm going to I might react to his Shadow of the Erd Tree critique next time, now that I think about it, because I think it might be fun, actually, especially because it's 9 days old at the time of recording this stream. So I think that might be fun to watch that next, and also because I'd like to sort of do Joseph Anderson's shit and kind of wrap that up before the anniversary stream happens. So I might try to do Joseph Anderson's thingy, his review of the DLC. So we'll see how that goes when the time comes, as it were. So for now, we will probably end the stream here. So look forward to his DLC review next Saturday. Gay, don't do it. Are you telling him not to join the server or not to do this other stuff? But yeah, so I've got a couple of other stuff to watch right now, but again, a lot of it is sort of up in the air at the moment. All of the above. Okay. But yeah, so again, next week we'll probably look at Joseph's Elden Ring DLC video. Hopefully, but I need to see. I'm not sure if I'm going to stream on the 14th or not. We might have family shit going on. But I will let you guys know beforehand in a post, just saying can't do it. Sorry. But anyway, we made it through another video. I'm very happy about that. I'm very, very happy about that. And now I've really got to go to the bathroom and I've got to eat. I'm starving and about to wet myself. So thank you all for being here. And thank you for joining Discord if you did. I see Sheep and Andrew in there. So thank you all for joining along for these streams. And yeah, I hope you have a good weekend. And I will see you guys, hopefully, next week.